Hi guys, and welcome to History for Calm Nights. Tonight we wander beneath a haze of coal smoke and fading orange lights, slipping into a narrow Victorian street where chimneys crowd the skyline and washing lines sway like tired flags. You stand at the edge of a working-class neighbourhood just as evening settles in and the air carries that unmistakable tang of soot and damp brick. Boots scrape over cobbles, a cart rattles past, somewhere a baby cries thin and insistent. You're about to discover how families here sleep and rest, though, I should warn you. Gently, you probably would not survive this without a very firm mattress and a decent hot water bottle. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, tell me where you are in the world and what time it is as you listen. I love imagining this quiet little global circle of night owls and early birds. Now dim the lights, you draw your coat closer as dusk thickens. The sky above is no grand sweep of stars, but a murky violet smudged by smoke. In industrial towns across 19th century Britain, chimneys belched coal fumes day and night, and that haze did not politely vanish at sunset. It lingers, a soft, dirty blanket pressed over rooftops. A widely recognised historical reality is that by the mid-19th century, cities such as Manchester and Birmingham were notorious for air thick with industrial pollution staining buildings and lungs alike. You taste it now, faintly metallic. Windows begin to glow one by one. Not bright electric light, of course, but the tremble of candle flames and oil lamps. In some streets, gas lamps flicker to life with a low hiss, casting a watery halo that barely pushes back the dark. The lamplighter has already passed ladder over his shoulder, tapping each glass globe in turn. You watch the flame shudder and steady. It is beautiful in a fragile way. Children linger outside longer than you expect. They play hopscotch chalked on the pavement, their laughter echoing between brick walls. There is energy here even after long hours. Many of these children have worked today, perhaps in a factory or running errands, yet they squeeze the last drops from daylight. When a mother calls sharply from an upstairs window, they scatter indoors like startled sparrows. You follow one family toward their door. The entrance is narrow, paint-peeling steps worn hollow in the centre. You brush your hand along the brick and feel grit against your palm. The house stands shoulder to shoulder with identical neighbours, a row of terraced homes built quickly to house swelling urban populations. Scholars still discuss whether the speed of this expansion was an inevitable byproduct of industrial progress, or a failure of planning that could have been softened with foresight. As you stand here, the answer feels less theoretical and more immediate. These walls are thin. A man pauses at the threshold, removing his cap. His face is smudged with coal dust that no quick wash will fully erase. He coughs once quietly as if apologising for the sound. Inside, a woman has already drawn curtains across the front window. Privacy is a precious commodity. You slip in behind them, careful not to disturb the rhythm of their evening. The entryway smells of boiled cabbage and damp wool. Boots line the wall. A kettle hums faintly over a small fire. There is no grand hallway, no sweeping staircase. Instead, you stand in a front room that serves many purposes. By day, it may be a sitting room. By night it will transform perhaps subtly into part of the sleeping arrangement. You glance upward and imagine the low ceilings pressing close. A firmly established fact about working-class housing in Victorian Britain is that many families occupied just 2 rooms, sometimes even 1 despite having several children. Space is elastic here, stretched and reshaped depending on the hour. Furniture is not merely decorative but strategic, for the night. A dog barks, then another for the night. A dog barks, then another answers. Somewhere farther off, a factory whistle blows a final time, though some shifts will continue through darkness. Night does not mean silence in these districts. It simply changes the tone. You pause by the small fireplace. The coals glow red steady and hypnotic. Heat gathers closest to the hearth, leaving the corners cool and shadowed. Imagine how this warmth will matter later when bodies cluster together for sleep. Already you sense how rest here is less about luxury and more about negotiation. Who sleeps closest to the fire? Who curls farthest from the drafty window? These decisions carry weight. There is a curious detail tucked into social records of the time that always makes modern listeners blink. In some overcrowded lodging houses, beds were rented by the hour, and in the most extreme cases, people even paid to sleep upright, tied to a rope stretched across the room. The rope would be cut in the morning and sleepers would tumble forward. It sounds almost absurd, like a dark comedy sketch, yet it reveals how precious horizontal rest could be. Tonight, however, you remain in a family home, modest but anchored by familiarity. The woman stirs the pot on the hob, movements efficient. The man sits heavily at the table. Their conversation is low practical. Wages, the price of coal, a neighbour's illness. You sense fatigue settling over the room like a second dusk. Shoulders drop, voices soften, the day loosens its grip. You move toward the small back window and peer out. Behind the houses lies a narrow yard, shared boundaries marked by low fences. Laundry hangs limp in the fading light. The earth is uneven, a mix of mud and ash. A cat slips silently along the wall, tail high. Above, the sky deepens toward indigo. Historians continue to debate how families themselves perceived these cramped conditions. Did they see them primarily as hardship or simply as the normal backdrop of life? It is tempting to impose modern expectations of privacy and comfort, yet people adapt remarkably to what surrounds them. As you stand here, you sense resilience threaded through routine. A clock ticks on the mantel, each second distinct. You notice how the rhythm of the house shifts again. Chairs scrape softly as they are repositioned. Dishes are stacked. The kettle is lifted away from heat. This is the quiet choreography that leads towards sleep. The front door bolts with a firm click. Curtains are checked. The last embers are nudged carefully. The street outside dims further, though voices still drift faintly through brick and plaster. You inhale once more, catching smoke, soap, and something like tired hope. You have only just arrived, and already you feel the contours of the night forming around you. Soon you will climb the narrow stairs and see how bodies arrange themselves in limited space. How rest becomes communal rather than solitary. For now you linger in this smoky twilight, listening to the city breathe steady and unhurried. As Victorian Britain prepares to lie down, you leave the fading glow of the hearth and follow the family toward the narrow staircase. The steps creak beneath each footfall, wood worn smooth in the centre from years of use. Your hand slides along a banister that feels slightly tacky from coal dust drifting in through unseen cracks. The air grows warmer as you climb, but not fresher. It is the warmth of bodies and trapped breath rather than any true circulation. At the top of the stairs, you step into a room that must serve more purposes than its size reasonably allows. By daylight, it might hold mending reading or a small meal when the front room is too cold. Now, as evening deepens, it transforms into sleeping quarters. This is where the reality of working-class rest settles fully around you. A broadly accepted historical fact is that overcrowding was common in industrial districts, with entire families often sharing a single bedroom. In some cases, even that term feels generous. One chamber might contain a bedstead, a truckle bed tucked beneath it, and a small cradle balanced near the wall. You take in the arrangement slowly. There is no spare corner. The main bed stands against the wall, its wooden frame sturdy but plain. The mattress bulges unevenly beneath a thin coverlet. Nearby, a smaller pallet rests directly on the floor, little more than a tick stuffed with straw or flock. You pause, letting your eyes adjust to the dimness. The only light comes from a candle carried upstairs, its flame bending as someone passes. You notice how each object holds intention. A peg on the wall supports a bundle of clothing that will double as a pillow. A chair stands ready to hold garments once removed. Beneath the window, which is cracked slightly open despite the chill, a child's blanket is already folded with careful hands. Space here is not empty. It is negotiated. You feel it in the way the mother directs the younger children with gentle firmness. Shoes off, hands washed in a basin of cooling water, hair brushed, quickly tangled, smoothed by fingers. There is little room for lingering or elaborate ritual. Efficiency is kindness when several bodies must fit within four walls. You shift closer to the window and inhale. The air carries soot and the faint tang of horse manure from the street below. Ventilation is limited. Many working-class homes relied on small windows and shared walls, meaning stale air often lingered through the night. Some social reformers of the era insisted that fresh air was essential for health, advocating for improved housing design. Whether families themselves embraced these recommendations fully is less certain. Historians still argue whether awareness of sanitation translated quickly into everyday practice among those pressed by poverty. The father sits on the edge of the main bed, unlacing his boots with slow, tired movements. His shoulders slope forward. You hear the faint sigh that escapes him as leather finally loosens. Across the room, a child suppresses a giggle, already half giddy with fatigue. The mother lifts the smallest one and settles him into the cradle, rocking gently with her foot while continuing to tidy. There is a curious detail recorded in some memoirs of the period that might surprise you. In households where space was particularly scarce, older children sometimes slept head to toe in the same bed to maximize room. It sounds almost comical when described, yet here it feels entirely practical. Feet at one end, heads at the other, warmth shared without much ceremony. You lower yourself cautiously onto the edge of the pallet, feeling the give of straw beneath the thin ticking. It rustles softly, a dry whisper that seems louder in the hush of night. The texture is uneven, little ridges pressing through fabric. Comfort in the modern sense is not the goal. Rest is. The candle is set in a small holder on a chest of drawers. Shadows leap across the walls, stretching and shrinking as the flame flickers. The plaster shows hairline cracks. You notice how sound travels easily here. From below, the faint murmur of neighbours drifts upward. A door closes next door. Someone coughs through the wall. Privacy is porous. The mother kneels briefly beside the bed, hands clasped. A short prayer slips from her lips, barely audible. Faith is woven quietly into these nightly routines. The children echo a few words before scrambling into their assigned places. The father extinguishes the candle with a quick pinch, plunging the room into near darkness. Only a pale ribbon of streetlight seeps through the thin curtains. You lie back and feel the collective settling. The bed creaks as weight shifts. Straw rustles again. A small elbow presses into your side. Someone sighs. There is no dramatic stillness, only gradual quiet. Bodies adjust, seeking warmth and space in equal measure. A mainstream observation drawn from Victorian social surveys is that many reformers were shocked by the intimacy forced upon families by such arrangements. They worried about morality, about children witnessing adult life too closely. Yet within the home, these proximities were often accepted as ordinary. You sense how familiarity blunts embarrassment. Sleep arrives not through isolation but through shared fatigue. The room cools quickly once the candle is gone. You feel a draft slip under the door, brushing your ankles. The window left slightly open allows a thin thread of night air to snake inward. It carries distant sounds. A cart rolling late. Laughter from a public house. The clop of a solitary horse. You consider how different this is from the curated quiet many of us expect. Here, silence is never absolute. Instead, there is a layered soundscape that becomes almost soothing in its predictability. The neighbour's cough, the ticking clock below, the faint whistle of wind at the eaves. Scholars continue to debate the psychological impact of such dense living conditions. Did constant proximity foster stronger familial bonds, or did it quietly strain tempers and privacy? As you lie here pressed between warmth and rough fabric, you sense both possibilities coexisting. There is comfort in shared heat, and yet you crave just a few more inches of space. A child murmurs in sleep, turning toward the wall. The cradle creaks softly as the baby shifts. The mother rises once more, half asleep, to rock it gently. This too is part of the pattern. Rest is not uninterrupted. It is fragmented, woven around care. Your eyes grow accustomed to the dark. The ceiling looms close above. You trace the outline of beams in faint silhouette. The smell of wool blankets, slightly damp from the day, mixes with the lingering scent of coal smoke in bedsheet and fabric. It is earthy, almost sweet. You realize that night here is less about escape and more about endurance softened by closeness. The room may be small, but it contains everything necessary for survival. Warmth, kinship. A few hours of shared oblivion before dawn demands attention again. You exhale slowly, allowing your body to sink into the uneven mattress. Around you, breathing synchronizes into a gentle chorus. The city hum persists beyond brick walls, yet inside this room a fragile pocket of rest forms. And you remain there, held within it, listening, as Victorian Britain settles deeper into sleep. You wake slightly in the darkness, not because of noise, but because someone has turned beside you and claimed a fraction more of the mattress. Your shoulder nudges against another arm. A warm breath brushes your cheek. For a moment you forget where you are, then the faint smell of straw and coal smoke reminds you. You are not alone in this bed. You were never meant to be. The shared bed is not a novelty here, it is the rule. In working-class Victorian households, bed sharing was common out of necessity rather than sentiment. A single mattress might accommodate parents and younger children, while older siblings curl together on a secondary pallet. You feel how the arrangement shapes everything. Limbs must tuck in neatly. Sudden movements ripple outward like pebbles dropped into water. The father lies nearest the wall, his back solid and reassuring. The mother rests beside him, one arm instinctively curved toward the smallest child nestled between them. You occupy the outer edge, aware that one careless shift might send you half-sliding toward the floor. There is a quiet choreography to sleeping like this. Each person learns the boundaries of others, even in dreams. A well-documented social pattern shows that communal sleeping was not confined to the poorest families. Even in modestly comfortable homes, children often shared beds well into adolescence. Privacy as a modern expectation held less weight than practicality. You sense how warmth becomes a shared resource. On cold nights, bodies serve as insulation, a living quilt. There is something unexpectedly tender about it. A child stirs and presses closer to the mother without fully waking. She adjusts this blanket by touch alone. The father clears his throat softly, then stills. Breathing deepens again. You listen to the layered rhythm, a kind of domestic lullaby. At the same time, you cannot ignore the constraints. The mattress dips unevenly beneath combined weight. A stray knee jabs your thigh. The blanket slips and a draft finds the gap instantly. You tug the fabric back into place. Sleep here is negotiated in increments. A curious tidbit from 19th century observers notes that in some regions people believed sleeping too far apart from loved ones invited loneliness or even misfortune. Closeness was associated not only with warmth but with emotional security. Whether that belief truly shaped behaviour or simply justified cramped conditions is difficult to untangle. Scholars continue to discuss how much of Victorian domestic life was guided by tradition versus economic compulsion. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the small child whose hair tickles your chin. The texture of the blanket is coarse, likely wool, and faintly scratchy against your skin. Beneath it, the sheet feels cool where it has not been warmed by bodies. Your hand brushes the ticking of the mattress and feels straw pressing upward in small ridges. Outside, a late passerby laughs too loudly. The sound floats through the thin wall and fades. The bed creaks in response to someone rolling over. You begin to understand how families here developed an almost unconscious sensitivity to one another's movements. A parent can detect from the slightest rustle whether a child is restless or ill. A sibling knows when to pull a blanket edge without waking the rest. There is also the question of modesty. Victorian society is often painted as prudish, yet within working-class homes, practicality trumped strict separation. Night clothes are simple, a long shirt perhaps, or an undergarment worn thin with washing. Candles are extinguished quickly. Darkness itself becomes a curtain. Some reformers of the time expressed alarm at mixed-age bed sharing, fearing moral consequences. Historians still argue whether such concerns reflected genuine widespread issues or middle-class anxieties projected onto poorer communities. As you lie here, what you feel most strongly is fatigue. After long hours of labour, sleep arrives less as a moral dilemma and more as a physical necessity. A child's foot presses briefly against your calf, then withdraws. The warmth is steady and almost comforting. You realise that solitary sleep, while luxurious, can also feel cold and exposed. Here, even in constraint, there is a kind of collective safety. The door downstairs is bolted. The family is gathered in one place. If danger were to come, it would meet not an isolated individual, but a cluster of bodies ready to wake together. The mattress shifts again as the father coughs lightly. Coal dust has a way of settling deep in the lungs. You hear the mother murmur a sleepy question, barely audible, then silence once more. This is how nights pass, not in uninterrupted stillness, but in small waves of awareness. A widely recognised fact about Victorian urban life is that mortality rates were high, particularly among children. In such a context, closeness at night may have carried added meaning. To hold a child near was to reassure oneself of their continued breathing. You sense this in the way the mother's hand rests lightly on a small back rising and falling. You adjust your position, carefully curling slightly to fit the available space. Your spine aligns with the edge of the mattress. The wooden bed frame presses faintly against your hip. It is not ideal comfort, yet your body begins to adapt. Muscles soften, thoughts drift. There is a faint drip somewhere in the house, perhaps from a leaky gutter outside. Each drop lands with quiet persistence. You focus on the pattern. Drop, pause, drop. It blends with breathing, with the distant rumble of a cart, with the soft scratch of straw. You consider how different this shared rest feels from the curated solitude of modern bedrooms. Here individuality dissolves at night. You are part of a small ecosystem of sleepers, each dependent on the other's warmth and relative stillness. There is inconvenience, certainly, but also a subtle reassurance in the presence of others. As you hover between waking and sleep, you sense how deeply ingrained this pattern becomes. Children raised in such closeness may find empty rooms unsettling later in life. Silence might feel louder than a chorus of breathing. Historians continue to debate how industrialization reshaped not only work but intimate domestic habits, including the gradual shift towards separate bedrooms in later decades. For now, though, separation is a distant concept. The blanket rises and falls with collective breath. A final murmur slips from someone's lips. Outside, the city dims slightly as midnight approaches. Within these four walls, shared warmth anchors you. You close your eyes, fully allowing the press of bodies and the faint scent of wool to blur into something almost soothing. The bed may be crowded, but it holds you all the same. And in this closeness, Victorian Britain rests one careful breath at a time. At some hazy point before dawn, you become aware not of the people beside you, but of the surface beneath you. The mattress has shifted in the night. A ridge of straw presses insistently against your shoulder blade, and your hip has found a shallow hollow worn by years of use. You open your eyes to darkness that feels almost textured thick with the faint scent of dust and wool. You slide your hand beneath the thin sheet and feel the structure of the bed more clearly. This is no spring mattress with hidden coils. It is a tick filled with straw, perhaps mixed with flock, which is shredded wool or scraps gathered from tailoring shops. In many working-class Victorian homes, such stuffing formed the core of bedding, replaced or refreshed only when it became unbearably lumpy. It rustles softly as you shift a dry whisper like wind through brittle grass. A commonly accepted detail of 19th century domestic life is that mattresses were rarely uniform. Straw could clump. Flock could migrate to one corner. Over time, the centre of the bed sagged while the edges remained stubbornly firm. You feel that imbalance now, your body subtly angled toward the middle, as if gravity itself prefers that spot. You imagine the effort required to maintain this bedding. Straw must be aired, beaten, occasionally replaced. In damp climates, moisture seeps in easily, leaving a faint, musty undertone that no amount of shaking fully removes. You inhale and detect it beneath the coal smoke that has settled into every fibre of the room. There is an oddly charming anecdote from the period about families who would turn mattresses regularly, not out of obsessive tidiness, but to redistribute wear and prevent permanent hollows. It was less about perfection and more about prolonging usefulness. Nothing here is disposable. Every object earns its keep. You press your palm flat against the ticking. The fabric is coarse, tightly woven to prevent the stuffing from escaping. Tiny pricks of straw poke through it in places, reminders that comfort is negotiated rather than guaranteed. Your modern spine, accustomed to layered foam and ergonomic design, might protest loudly. Yet your body, softened by fatigue, begins to accept the uneven support. Across the room on the smaller pallet, one of the older children shifts. The floor beneath that thin mattress offers no give at all. Compared to that, your current perch feels almost indulgent. It is all relative. The blanket covering you is wool, slightly scratchy but undeniably warm. Wool was prized for its insulating qualities, even among families with limited means. A firmly grounded observation from household inventories of the era shows that blankets often represented one of the more valuable textile possessions in a modest home. They were mended, repeatedly patched at corners and guarded carefully. You tug the blanket closer and feel the texture against your chin. It carries faint traces of soap from the last washing and the ever-present whisper of smoke. You realise that bedding absorbs the atmosphere of daily life. It smells like the house because it lives in the house without pause. A faint grey light begins to seep around the curtain's edge, though dawn is still some time away. In this dimness, you can just make out the outline of the bed frame. It is sturdy but simple, likely pine or another affordable wood. Some families slept directly on straw pallets without frames at all, but here there is at least a raised structure lifting you slightly from the cold floor. Evenly, or did many remain reliant on the evenly? Or did many remain reliant on the most basic materials well into the later decades? As you lie here, the question feels personal. Improvement would mean fewer ridges pressing into your ribs. It would mean deeper, less interrupted rest. You turn gently onto your side and the straw inside the mattress shifts with a faint shushing sound. That sound, repeated night after night, becomes part of the household's soundscape. It signals settling surrender, the slow drift into sleep. You notice also the absence of sheets layered in abundance. There is one, perhaps two at most. Laundering is labour-intensive, requiring water hauled and heated soap worked vigorously by hand. Bedding is changed less frequently than modern sensibilities might prefer. Yet this does not necessarily equate to neglect. It reflects the reality of time and effort measured carefully. A small hand reaches out in sleep and brushes your arm. The child's fingers are warm, slightly sticky from imperfect washing. You resist the urge to shift too much, aware that a sudden movement could ripple across the mattress and wake others. The shared surface amplifies every twitch. There is a minor but intriguing detail found in some oral histories describing how children sometimes enjoyed the faint crackle of straw beneath them, associating it with the coziness of bedtime. What might strike you as discomfort could to them signal familiarity. Comfort is partly physical, partly learned. You consider the climate. In colder months, additional layers might be piled atop this bed, coats even draped over sleeping bodies for extra warmth. In warmer weather, the same mattress could feel stifling, trapping heat against your skin. For now, in this transitional hour, the temperature is tolerable, neither biting nor oppressive. You trace a finger along the seam of the mattress. It's ticking and feel where it has been repaired. Careful stitches closing a tear. That repair speaks of thrift and resilience. Nothing is casually replaced. Even bedding tells a story of adaptation. Outside, a distant cart rolls over cobblestones, the wheels producing a low rumble that vibrates faintly through the floorboards. The mattress absorbs some of that tremor, passing it gently to your bones. You are aware of being connected not only to the people beside you, but to the street beyond. There is no lofty canopy above you, no embroidered drapery framing your rest. Yet there is a certain honesty in this arrangement. The bed is what it is. It supports as best it can. It creaks, it rustles, it bears the imprint of generations. As your eyelids grow heavier again, you find yourself oddly attuned to the simple mechanics of it all. Straw compressed under weight, wool trapping warmth, wood steady beneath. These humble materials create the foundation for rest in a world that demands much from waking hours. You exhale slowly and allow your body to sink a fraction deeper into the uneven surface. The ridge at your shoulder becomes less intrusive. The hollow at your hip feels almost shaped for you. Around you, breathing remains steady, a soft tide rising and falling. The mattress may be lumpy, the blanket thin, but they cradle you nonetheless. In this modest bed crafted from straw and persistence, Victorian Britain, Britain finds its nightly pause before the next day's labour begins again. Somewhere in the deep stretch of night, when your body has finally surrendered to the uneven mattress, a new layer of sound rises and pulls you gently back toward awareness. It is not the rustle of straw or the sigh of a child. It is the city itself, still awake beyond these thin brick walls. You lie very still, eyes closed, and listen. First comes the low, distant thud of machinery. Even at this hour, certain factories continue their work. In industrial centres across Victorian Britain, night shifts were not unusual, particularly in textile mills and ironworks where production demanded relentless motion. The rhythm reaches you faintly like a heartbeat carried through stone. Thrum, pause, thrum. It is steady enough to become almost hypnotic. A cart rattles past on the cobbles outside wheels, striking uneven stone with sharp clacks. You picture the driver hunched against the chill, delivering goods before dawn. The horse's hooves land in a measured pattern, echoing briefly in the narrow street. Then the sound fades, swallowed by distance. You shift slightly and feel the mattress respond beneath you. No one else wakes. They're accustomed to this nocturnal orchestra. For you it is still novel. A frequently cited observation about Victorian urban life is that true silence was rare in working-class districts. Proximity to workshops or rail lines and crowded streets meant that nights carried their own industry. The idea of a quiet, insulated bedroom would have seemed almost fantastical here. Rest unfolded alongside ongoing activity, not in its absence. From somewhere farther away comes the piercing whistle of a train. It slices through the darkness with startling clarity. Railways expanded rapidly throughout the 19th century, stitching together cities and towns with iron tracks. That progress brought not only mobility, but also sound new and mechanical. You imagine the plume of steam billowing under moonlight, the engine glowing faintly as it barrels through the countryside. Closer by, a door slams. Voices murmur. A burst of laughter erupts and then dissolves. Perhaps a group returning from a late shift or from the public house. The laughter carries a rough edge, but also relief. After hours of labour, even brief conviviality matters. You notice how the walls transmit these noises with little resistance. Plaster and brick offer only modest separation. In some homes, neighbours could reportedly hear conversations clearly through shared walls. There is an intimacy to urban living that extends beyond family. You're never entirely alone, even with strangers. There is a small, curious detail recorded in contemporary accounts that amuses you in spite of the hour. Some residents grew so familiar with the nightly sounds of particular neighbours that they could identify who was walking by based on the rhythm of footsteps alone. A dragging heel, a quick staccato stride, the jangle of certain keys. The street itself becomes a map of personalities. A baby stirs in the cradle near the foe. A soft whimper escapes, almost lost beneath the distant machinery. The mother responds instinctively, rocking gently with her foot while still half asleep. The cradle creaks in a soothing cadence. Within moments, the infant settles again. You inhale and detect a subtle shift in the air. Someone nearby has stoked a fire and the scent of fresh smoke drifts through the cracks around the window frame. Coal smoke is heavier than the delicate fragrance of wood. It settles low and clings to fabric. By morning it will leave a faint film on the windowsill. There remains an ongoing discussion among social historians about how constant exposure to such industrial noise affected sleep quality and long-term health. Did people adapt fully, or did fragmented rest contribute to the fatigue so often noted in factory reports? As you lie here, you sense both resilience and strain. The body can grow accustomed to much, yet it pays a price in subtle ways. A watchman's call echoes faintly down the street, announcing the hour in a drawn-out voice. His words blur together, but the tone is clear. Time is marked aloud. Before widespread personal clocks, such calls offered reassurance that someone remained alert while others slept. You feel a flicker of comfort at the thought. The mattress beneath you vibrates slightly as another heavy cart rolls by. You imagine barrels or crates stacked high goods destined for markets that will open at first light. The economy does not pause entirely even when families close their eyes. Inside the room, breathing remains steady. The father snores softly now, a low rumble that blends surprisingly well with the distant factory thud. A child shifts and mutters something unintelligible, perhaps replaying fragments of the day. You're surrounded by layered sound, yet none of it feels sharp enough to fully wake you. There is also the occasional bark of a dog, the cry of a cat in dispute, the faint clatter of a loose shutter. Each noise flares briefly and then recedes like sparks from a dying fire. Over time, the mind learns to filter them to distinguish between ordinary disturbance and genuine threat. A fact drawn from 19th century medical commentary suggests that physicians sometimes recommended earplugs made of wax for those living near particularly loud works. Whether many working families could spare the wax or considered such measures practical is another matter. Most simply endured. Lullaby of the industrial age. Not lullaby of the industrial age. Not birdsong or rustling leaves, but wheels, whistles, and human voices carrying through brick corridors. Gradually the rhythm settles into something almost comforting. The machinery becomes background. The cartwheels space farther apart. Even the laughter fades as the last stragglers find their doors. Your eyelids grow heavy once more. The mattress cradles you in its imperfect way. The child beside you breathes in a steady pattern, small chest rising and falling. Cradle is still. The city does not fully sleep, but it softens, and within this small room wrapped in wool and the muted pulse of distant industry you drift again toward rest, held between the hum of progress and the fragile quiet of a working-class night. A pale thread of light begins to gather behind the curtain, not yet strong enough to wake the household, but enough to outline shapes in soft grey. You stir as the smallest child lets out a questioning whimper. The night has not fully released its hold yet. Morning is quietly negotiating entry. Your attention drifts toward the far corner of the room where the older children sleep. It is not truly a separate space, just a narrowing of available floor between the wall and a battered chest of drawers. A thin pallet lies there, barely thicker than a folded blanket. Two small bodies are curled upon it, knees tucked close, sharing warmth in their own compact way. In many working-class Victorian homes, children occupied whatever patch of space could be spared. There were no dedicated nurseries with painted walls and rocking horses. Instead, corners became bedrooms, and trunks doubled as seats by day and boundaries by night. A well-known feature of household arrangements during this period was the flexibility of space, constantly reshaped to meet immediate needs. You watch as one child's arm slips free of the blanket. The air in the room has cooled slightly and goosebumps rise along the small forearm. Without fully waking, the sibling beside them tugs the fabric back into place. It is a quiet gesture learned through repetition. Near the main bed, the cradle stands close enough for the mother to reach without rising. It is simple, perhaps, fashioned by a relative or purchased second-hand. Its wooden runners are worn smooth from countless nights of gentle rocking. Inside, the baby's cheeks are flushed with sleep. A faint milky scent lingers in the air around the cradle. A broadly acknowledged reality of 19th century family life is that infant mortality was heartbreakingly common. Illness could sweep through crowded districts quickly. That knowledge hovered over households like a persistent shadow. You sense how this awareness deepens attentiveness. A mother's ear is tuned to every irregular breath. A father wakes at the smallest change in rhythm. There is an interesting detail found in some recollections of the era. Older siblings often took on night duties when parents were exhausted from labour. A teenage daughter might rise to soothe a crying infant, sacrificing her own rest. Childhood and responsibility intertwined early. You glance toward the pallet again and imagine how these children will be expected to help before long. The faint light grows stronger, revealing the room in muted tones. The plaster walls show patches where damp has darkened the surface. A small crack runs from the ceiling corner down toward the window frame. You can almost feel the chill that seeps through such imperfections in colder months. You shift carefully and sit up mindful not to disturb those still sleeping. The floorboards are cool beneath your feet. From this angle you see more clearly how space is divided not by walls but by habit. The cradle marks one zone, the pallet another. The main bed anchors the room. Each area holds its own small universe of dreams. There has long been discussion among historians about how such close quarters influence sibling relationships. Did constant proximity nurture solidarity, or did it breed quiet resentment? As you observe the children now tangled together in shared blankets, you sense affection shaped by necessity. They know each other's breathing patterns, each other's midnight murmurs. A soft cough breaks the quiet. One of the older children turns and blinks, momentarily disoriented. For a heartbeat they seem unsure whether it is still night. Then recognition settles. Morning approaches, and with it the routines of work and errands. You notice the simple garments folded at the foot of the pallet, shirts worn thin at elbows, a small pair of boots with scuffed toes. These items wait patiently for the day's demands, but for now they remain still suspended between darkness and light. The baby stirs again, this time with more insistence. A thin cry pierces the dim room. The mother rises in one fluid motion, lifting the infant with practiced ease. She settles back onto the bed, cradling the small body close. The child quiets almost instantly at the familiar warmth. There is a modest but telling observation recorded in some social investigations of the time. Reformers who visited working-class homes were often struck by the tenderness displayed in these cramped spaces, contradicting stereotypes of neglect. Love did not require spacious rooms. It found expression in touch, in vigilance in shared blankets. You stand quietly absorbing the scene. Outside, the first distant calls of street vendors begin to thread through the air. A milk seller's voice carries faintly. Somewhere a door creaks open. The city is stretching awake. The older children rub their eyes and push themselves upright on the pallet. Their hair stands at odd angles. One yawns widely, then glances toward the cradle to gauge the baby's mood. Already they are attuned to the needs of the household. There remains an ongoing conversation among scholars about how industrial schedules reshaped family rhythms. Early factory shifts required children to rise before full daylight, compressing sleep into shorter spans. As you watch these young figures blink against the growing light, you feel the weight of that adjustment. Rest is precious, yet often curtailed. The room brightens, enough now that colours begin to emerge. The blanket's muted brown, the pale wood of the cradle, the grey of the walls. Morning does not burst in dramatically here. It seeps. You sense how children's rest differs from that of adults. Their sleep may be deeper, but it is also vulnerable to interruption. A crying sibling, a parent rising a neighbour's early knock can fracture it easily, and yet they adapt, learning to drift back quickly when they can. The mother hums softly as she nurses the baby. The melody is simple, repetitive, almost like the rhythm of the factory you heard earlier, a human counterpoint to industrial sound. The father shifts and sits up, rubbing his face with both hands. His night has been short. You remain near the corner, observing how this small room contains so many layers of care and constraint. The children fold their blankets with practiced movements. The pallet is rolled slightly to create walking space. Already the room begins its transformation back into daytime function. Night has passed, not in perfect silence, but in shared warmth and intermittent vigilance. The corners that held sleeping bodies now release them into motion. And you, having witnessed how children are tucked into whatever space can be found, feel the quiet resilience that defines this Victorian dawn. The light strengthens, and with it the small bedroom begins to empty. The older children slip downstairs, their footsteps careful but quick. The father follows, shoulders already tightening in anticipation of the day. For a brief moment the room feels almost spacious. Then you remember that by nightfall it will fill again. But this household holds one more presence you have not yet properly met. In the narrow strip of floor near the door where you assumed there was simply shadow lies, a rolled blanket and a neatly folded coat. As the last of the family descends the stairs, the coat stirs. A man sits up, slowly rubbing sleep from his eyes. He is not kin, he is a lodger. You had sensed him in the night only as an extra shift in the air, an additional breathing pattern blending with the rest. Now you see him clearly in the growing grey. His hair is flattened on one side, his boots placed with precision beside his makeshift bed are worn at the heel. Taking in a lodger was a widespread practice among working-class families in Victorian Britain. Extra income from renting out even a sliver of floor space could make the difference between managing and falling into debt. Census records from the period frequently show unrelated adults listed within small households sharing already limited rooms. You feel how economics reshapes intimacy. The lodger stretches quietly, mindful not to disturb the mother still tending the baby. There is a careful choreography to his movements. He rolls his blanket tightly and secures it with a piece of twine, transforming his sleeping spot back into ordinary floor. By daylight, there can be no sign that a grown man rested here mere hours before. You sense the delicate balance in this arrangement. The family gains a few extra coins each week. The lodger gains shelter from the street, yet privacy narrows further. Conversations must be measured. Nighttime movements become even more deliberate. There is a curious anecdote preserved in some urban memoirs describing how children sometimes formed quiet attachments to lodgers fascinated by their stories of distant towns or different trades. A lodger might be a dock worker between contracts, a labourer newly arrived from the countryside, or a widower seeking affordable shelter. Each carries a fragment of the wider world into this cramped room. The man before you rises fully now and smooths his coat. He nods politely to the mother, who acknowledges him with a brief glance. Their exchange is restrained but not cold. Familiarity has grown over weeks or months, yet boundaries remain intact. A broadly recognised aspect of Victorian housing culture is that the line between private and public space blurred easily in crowded districts. Homes were not sealed sanctuaries, they were porous economically and socially. Taking in lodgers was so common that entire streets developed reputations based on how many extra occupants they contained. You follow the lodger down the narrow staircase. The smell of breakfast porridge drifts upward. In the front room, now reclaimed from its nighttime hush, the table is set. The children sit close together on a bench. There is barely space for another adult, yet the lodger squeezes in, removing his cap respectfully. You notice how seating arrangements shift subtly. The father occupies his usual spot. The mother moves between hearth and table. The lodger positions himself at the edge, careful not to overstep. Even in shared quarters, hierarchy quietly persists. There has long been debate among social historians about how such living arrangements influenced moral attitudes and community ties. Did lodgers strengthen neighbourhood networks, or did they heighten suspicion and tension? As you watch this small gathering, you see neither dramatic conflict nor glowing harmony. Instead, you see pragmatism. The lodger eats quickly, the spoon scraping against the bowl in efficient strokes. He has his own shift to attend. Perhaps he works at the docks, perhaps in construction. The exact trade matters less than the rhythm it imposes. Like the family, he measures his rest against the demands of labour. You glance back upstairs, imagining the small patch of floor he occupied. At night, when the room was dark, distinction softened. In sleep, he became another quiet presence in the chorus of breathing. Yet by day, his status as outsider is gently reasserted. There is a modest but telling note found in some philanthropic reports of the era. Reformers often worried about the moral risks of unrelated men sleeping in close proximity to women and children. They framed it as a threat to decency. Families, however, often viewed it as a calculated necessity. Coins in hand outweighed abstract anxieties. The meal concludes. The father and lodger rise nearly in unison. Boots are pulled on. Caps adjusted. The front door opens, letting in a rush of cool morning air. Street sounds surge briefly, then dull again as the door shuts behind them. You remain inside, sensing the slight exhale of space once they depart. The room feels marginally larger, though only by a fraction. The mother gathers bowls and begins washing them in the basin. The children prepare for their own departures, each tasked with errands or shifts. Upstairs, the pallet in the corner has been rolled tighter. The main bed has been smoothed as best as possible. No trace remains of the lodger's presence, except perhaps a faint indentation on the floorboards where his weight rested. You reflect on how night here accommodates more than family. It absorbs strangers, weaving them temporarily into its fabric. The shared room becomes a microcosm of urban life, layered with relationships that are practical, fleeting, and sometimes surprisingly warm. As the house empties further, you feel the echo of the previous night. The crowded bed, the rustle of straw, the extra breathing pattern in the dark. Tonight the pattern will repeat. The lodger will return, unroll his blanket, and settle once more into that narrow strip of floor. For now, though, daylight has claimed the space, and you stand quietly in the small front room, aware that rest in Victorian Britain is rarely solitary, and never entirely simple. It is shaped by necessity, shared with kin and stranger alike, and folded away each morning to make room for another demanding day. The front door has barely closed behind the father and the lodger, when you sense how differently the day will unfold for each of them. Sleep, you realise, is not evenly distributed in this world. It bends itself around shifts' bells and factory whistles. Men and women move with brisk purpose. Men and women move with brisk purpose, collars turned up, lunch pails in hand. Some faces look rested enough. Others carry the unmistakable heaviness of interrupted nights. Industrial labour reshaped daily rhythms in profound ways. By the mid-19th century, factories commonly operated long hours, and in certain trades rotating shifts were introduced to keep machinery running as continuously as possible. This meant that some workers slept through parts of the day, while others rose before dawn. The natural cycle of light and dark became secondary to the demands of steam and profit. You imagine the father at his station inside a mill, the air thick with lint or metallic dust. If he works a standard daytime shift, he may rise at 5 and return after sunset. But if his schedule rotates, his rest will fracture. One week he might lie down at dusk, another he might stumble home as the others wake. Inside the house, the mother tidies quickly before attending to her own responsibilities. Her rest too has been shallow. She rose during the night to soothe the baby, and now she moves through morning with practiced endurance. Fatigue lingers behind her eyes, though she does not dwell on it. There is a small but fascinating note in some factory records indicating that workers occasionally napped during the meal breaks, heads resting on folded arms atop rough tables. Such brief pockets of sleep were not indulgent but essential. You picture a man leaning back against a brick wall cap, tipped over his face, stealing 10 minutes of oblivion before the bell summons him again. The street grows busier. A group of young women hurry past shawls drawn tight. Their conversation is animated but hushed energy flickering through weariness. In textile districts, especially female labour was common, and many women balanced paid work with domestic duties. Their sleep schedules must have felt like fragile puzzles constantly rearranged. There has been considerable discussion among researchers about how shift work affected family cohesion. Did mismatched schedules strain relationships, or did households adapt with remarkable flexibility? As you watch neighbours move in different directions at the same hour, you sense both tension and resilience woven together. You step back inside as the baby begins to fuss again. The mother lifts the child onto her hip while stirring a pot with her free hand. Her own rest will be measured in fragments throughout the day, perhaps a brief sit by the hearth once chores are complete. For many women in working-class homes, sustained daytime sleep was a rarity. The older children gather their things. One will attend school for a few hours, another may assist in a workshop. Their bedtime tonight will depend on how exhausted they are by evening. Childhood here does not guarantee uninterrupted slumber. You recall an intriguing detail from oral histories describing how some workers learned to fall asleep almost instantly once they lay down, training themselves to seize rest whenever it was available. In noisy lodging houses or crowded homes, this skill became invaluable. Sleep was not a slow descent, but a swift plunge. The factory whistle sounds in the distance, sharp and commanding. Its echo carries through the neighbourhood like a metallic cry. That sound dictates not only waking hours, but the very structure of rest. You imagine trying to ignore it to cling to warmth beneath a wool blanket, but the cost of tardiness would be steep. As the morning advances, the house grows quieter. The children have gone. The mother rocks the baby in a chair near the window. Sunlight struggles through the soot-coated glass, casting a muted glow across the floorboards. For a fleeting moment she closes her eyes, while the infant feeds head nodding forward in near sleep. Rest here is opportunistic. It appears in slivers rather than solid blocks. A chair becomes a temporary refuge. A bench in a workshop transforms into a pillow. Even standing against a wall during a brief pause can feel restorative. Some social commentators of the era worried openly about the health consequences of such irregular sleep. They linked chronic fatigue to workplace accidents and illness. Others argued that working people had always adapted to demanding schedules and that industrial life simply introduced new variations. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a complex interplay of endurance and strain. You glance upstairs, imagining how the room will feel tonight when different bodies return at staggered times. Perhaps the lodger will arrive first, unrolling his blanket in the dimness. The father may follow later, shoulders slumped, or the pattern might reverse entirely. There is a faint hum in the distance, machinery already fully awake. The city pulses with purpose, and within it, individual bodies negotiate their need for rest against relentless expectation. By midday, some night shift workers will be climbing into bed while the sun stands high. Their rooms must be darkened as best as possible, curtains drawn against brightness and street noise. You picture lying in that bed while the world outside is loud and active, trying to coax sleep from reluctant muscles. Back in the small front room, the mother finally settles the baby into the cradle and sits heavily in the chair. For a few precious minutes, she leans her head back and allows her eyes to close. The house is quiet enough. The moment is hers. You stand near the window and listen to the layered sounds of morning, aware that somewhere beyond your sight others are already longing for night. In Victorian Britain, rest does not align neatly with sunset. It bends around whistles' wages and worn-out bodies, and as the day unfolds you carry with you the knowledge that when darkness falls again, the arrangement of sleepers in that cramped upstairs room will reflect not only family ties, but the strange choreography of industrial time. By the time Saturday evening arrives, the mood inside the house feels subtly different. The week's labour still clings to everyone like a film of soot, yet there is a shared understanding that tomorrow morning will not demand the same early scramble. Even if Sunday brings church or errands, it carries a gentler rhythm. And so as dusk approaches, a particular ritual begins to unfold. You notice it first in the way the mother sets a large metal tub near the hearth. It is dented along one side, its surface dulled from years of use. Water is fetched in heavy pails, sloshing slightly as it is poured into the basin. The fire is coaxed brighter to warm it. Steam begins to rise, softening the sharp smell of coal with something cleaner. In many working-class Victorian households, a full bath was a weekly event rather than a daily habit. Heating sufficient water required time, fuel and effort. Saturday night became the customary moment for washing away the week's grime before Sunday observances. You can almost feel the collective relief as sleeves are rolled and collars unbuttoned. One by one they are lifted or guided into the tub. The water is tested with a cautious finger. A small squeal erupts when it proves hotter than expected. One by one they are lifted or guided into the basin. The room fills with splashing and laughter that contrasts sharply with the usual hush of bedtime. There is something intimate and communal about this process. The same water may be used sequentially, each child washed in turn, then perhaps the parents. Soap is worked into hair and along the arms that bear the faint traces of factory dust or the street grime. Towels, thin but treasured, are draped over shoulders afterward. A widely acknowledged feature of Victorian urban life is that access to indoor plumbing was limited for many working families during much of the century. Public bathhouses gradually appeared in larger cities, yet home bathing remained constrained by infrastructure. As you watch steam curl toward the ceiling, you appreciate the labour behind this simple act. The father returns slightly earlier than usual, aware of the evening's purpose. He removes his boots by the door and flexes his toes, grimacing faintly at the relief. When his turn comes, he lowers himself carefully into the tub knees, drawn close to fit the narrow space. The water darkens almost immediately, evidence of a week's exertion. There is a lightness in the air tonight. Even fatigue feels less oppressive when accompanied by cleanliness. The baby is wiped down with particular care, small limbs gleaming in the firelight. A soft scent of soap replaces the heavier odours of the week. An intriguing detail appears in some recollections of the period. Children sometimes regarded Saturday night baths as both chore and celebration, knowing that afterwards they might be allowed to sit up a little later than usual. Freshly scrubbed and wrapped in blankets, they felt briefly transformed. You move closer to the hearth and feel the warmth radiating outward. The dampness in the room creates a cosy atmosphere, almost like a temporary spa fashioned from necessity. The floorboards grow slick in places and someone nearly slips, prompting a burst of giggles. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about whether the emphasis on Saturday cleanliness intensified under the influence of religious expectations or public health campaigns. Did families bathe primarily for spiritual readiness or practical hygiene? The answer likely blends both motives. Here in this small room, the distinction feels secondary to the comfort of warm water. Once bathing concludes, the tub is emptied carefully into the yard. The room is dried as best as possible. Clean nightclothes, simple though they are pulled over tired bodies. The difference is palpable. Skin no longer itches with dust. Hair lies flatter against foreheads. You follow the family upstairs, noticing how the bed seems almost inviting tonight. The sheets, though not newly laundered, feel fresher against recently washed skin. The straw mattress rustles as usual, but its imperfections matter less. The children climb into their places with unusual eagerness. Their hair still slightly damp, they burrow beneath blankets and sigh contentedly. The father stretches out with a long exhale, muscles relaxing more fully than on previous nights. From the street below, you hear a few strains of music drifting from a nearby public house. Saturday carries its own soundtrack. Yet inside this home the mood is quieter, softer. A well-documented aspect of working-class life is that Sunday was often the only day with reduced industrial labour, granting families a modest reprieve. The knowledge of that pause shapes how they approach this evening. Sleep may come a little deeper, a little less rushed. You sit on the edge of the bed and feel the difference in your own body. Clean skin against coarse wool creates a pleasant contrast. The faint fragrance of soap lingers, mingling with the ever-present trace of smoke. The candle is extinguished as usual, but the darkness feels less heavy. Perhaps it is the satisfaction of ritual completed. Perhaps it is simply exhaustion eased by warmth. As breathing steadies around you, you reflect on how this weekly bath functions as more than hygiene. It marks time. It separates one cycle of labour from the next. It offers a brief illusion of renewal. Outside laughter swells and fades again. Inside the small room holds its freshly scrubbed occupants close. The mattress may still be lumpy, the space still cramped, but tonight there is an added layer of comfort. You close your eyes and let the quiet settle. The week has been washed away as best it can be. And in this steam-softened, soot-edged world, Saturday night offers a gentler descent into sleep. The freshness of Saturday night lingers only briefly. By the time several days have passed, the air inside the small house begins to feel heavy again, as though it has absorbed every breath and exhalation without release. You notice it most in the early hours when the room is still closed tight against the chill. You rise quietly and cross to the window. The glass is thin, slightly warped, and filmed with a faint residue that dulls the light. When you press your fingers against it, you feel the cool dampness that has collected overnight. Condensation beads along the lower edge, tiny droplets trembling before slipping down the pane. Ventilation in working-class Victorian homes was often limited, particularly in densely built industrial districts. Rows of terraced houses shared walls, leaving little opportunity for cross breezes. Windows were small to conserve heat, and in colder months they remained shut as much as possible. Fresh air was desirable, but warmth was essential. You lift the sash a cautious inch. Immediately a ribbon of outside air threads into the room. It carries the sharp scent of coal smoke mingled with the faint odour of refuse from the alley behind the house. You inhale and feel the sting at the back of your throat. This is not the crisp countryside breeze one might imagine. It is urban air, textured and persistent. Below the street is already active. A woman shakes a rug over her doorstep, releasing a cloud of dust that drifts lazily downward. A boy runs past boots slapping against cobbles. Somewhere nearby, someone is emptying a chamber pot into a gutter, the splash echoing faintly. A broadly recognised fact about 19th century cities is that sanitation infrastructure struggled to keep pace with rapid population growth. Open drains, overflowing cesspits, and inadequate waste removal contributed to lingering odours and health hazards. You sense how these realities seep into sleeping spaces no matter how carefully curtains are drawn. The mother joins you at the window, glancing at the sky before adjusting the opening slightly wider. She understands the need for circulation, even if the incoming air is imperfect. The room responds almost immediately. The heaviness thins. The blanket at the foot of the bed stirs faintly. There is an interesting detail recorded in some domestic advice manuals of the period recommending that bedding be aired daily, even in cramped quarters. Families were encouraged to pull back blankets and open windows briefly to dispel dampness. Whether every household could consistently follow such guidance is another matter, yet the intention reveals growing awareness of health and hygiene. You turn back toward the bed and run your hand across the sheet. It feels cooler now, less stale. The straw mattress beneath still rustles, but the scent of trapped air has softened. From the yard behind the house comes the metallic clang of a bucket striking stone. A neighbour is likely drawing water from a shared pump. You imagine the narrow strip of earth between houses, often muddy, sometimes strewn with scraps. Ventilation from such spaces carries both freshness and decay. There has been thoughtful debate among historians about how much working families internalised public health messaging during this period. Some argue that awareness of miasma, the belief that foul air caused illness, prompted greater efforts to ventilate homes. Others suggest that economic constraints limited practical change. As you stand at the window, you see how theory meets brick-and-mortar reality. The baby begins to cough softly in the cradle. Not a harsh sound, but enough to draw attention. The mother turns, instinctively adjusting the child's blanket. You feel a flicker of concern. In crowded districts, respiratory ailments were common, exacerbated by smoke and dampness. You glance upward at the ceiling, noting faint stains where moisture has seeped through. In winter, condensation can freeze along window edges, leaving delicate patterns that melt into damp streaks by morning. In summer, the trapped heat makes the room, stifling the air thick and unmoving. A small but vivid anecdote appears in some accounts describing how families sometimes hung sheets near windows to filter soot from incoming air. The fabric would darken over time, a visible testament to what they were breathing. It was a modest defence against an invisible threat. The mother props the window open with a small wooden wedge. Outside, a cart rolls past carrying sacks of coal, black dust trailing behind. The irony is not lost on you. The very fuel that warms the house also contaminates its air. You step closer to the doorway and feel the subtle draft flowing through the hall. It brushes your ankles and moves upward, creating a faint current. Even this small movement seems beneficial. A frequently noted feature of Victorian reform efforts was the push for improved housing design, including better ventilation and wider streets to allow light and air to circulate. Model dwellings were constructed in some areas, offering slightly more spacious and better ventilated rooms. Yet many families remained in older structures for decades. You imagine lying down at night with the window cracked open, listening to the layered sounds of the street while feeling that cool ribbon of air against your cheek. It is both refreshing and unsettling. With the window ajar outside, noises feel closer. The boundary between home and city thins further. The children return from errands and school later in the day, bringing with them the smell of outdoors, a mix of dust and distant bread ovens. Their presence stirs the air again, warming it with movement. As evening approaches, the window is lowered once more to conserve heat. The room gradually regains its enclosed quality. You sense how each night's rest is shaped not only by who shares the bed, but by the air itself, heavy or light, stagnant or stirred. You lie back on the mattress and watch the faint movement of the curtain in the remaining breeze. It flutters gently, then settles. The air carries the persistent undertone of smoke, but also something cleaner from the brief airing. In this small Victorian bedroom, ventilation is a daily negotiation between comfort and survival. And as darkness gathers again, you are acutely aware that even the invisible elements of the room play their part in how deeply you sleep. Even with the window opened each morning and the bedding aired as faithfully as circumstances allow, there are certain intruders that fresh air alone cannot banish. You discover this one night when a faint tickle along your wrist pulls you from the edge of sleep. At first you assume it is a stray thread from the blanket. You brush at it absently and turn over. But moments later the sensation returns sharper now. A tiny prickle, deliberate and insistent. You sit up slightly in the dimness, heart beating a fraction faster. Bedbugs. They are small, persistent, and entirely indifferent to human schedules. In working-class Victorian homes where mattresses were stuffed with straw and bedding was reused for years, infestations were an ongoing challenge. The very materials that provided warmth and softness also offered perfect hiding places. You run your hand across the mattress seam and feel nothing obvious, yet you know they are there. Tiny bodies tucked into cracks of the bed frame emerging when warmth and stillness invite them. A widely acknowledged aspect of 19th century domestic life is that vermin were common companions in crowded urban dwellings. Fleas, lice and bedbugs thrived where people and animals lived in close quarters. A child beside you shifts and scratches at an ankle, without fully waking. The sound is soft but unmistakable. The mother attuned even in sleep murmurs and reaches to adjust the blanket. You sense that this is not a rare occurrence. It is an accepted nuisance woven into the nightly routine. There is a curious practice recorded in some households of the period. Families would occasionally dismantle bedsteads and pour boiling water into crevices to scald hidden insects. The effort required was considerable and the results temporary at best. Yet the ritual offered a sense of action against an invisible enemy. You lean closer to the wall and examine the wooden frame in the faint light. The grain of the wood shows tiny imperfections, each a potential refuge. The straw mattress, for all its practicality, is porous. It shelters more than just human sleepers. Some social investigators of the era wrote vividly about the prevalence of vermin in overcrowded districts, often using it as evidence in arguments for housing reform. Yet there remains discussion among historians about how widespread severe infestations truly were, versus how much was amplified for moral persuasion. As you sit in the half-dark, the itch along your skin feels less theoretical. The father turns over with a low grunt. His movement sends a ripple across the mattress, briefly disrupting the insect's delicate balance. You wonder how many bites he has endured without comment. After a day of physical labour, perhaps such irritations barely register. You lie back down cautiously, pulling the blanket tighter around your shoulders. The warmth that once felt comforting now seems to invite unwanted company. And yet exhaustion exerts its own force. The body craves rest, even in imperfect conditions. A small but telling detail appears in some memoirs describing the distinctive smell of heavily infested rooms, a faint sweet mustiness that clung to bedding. You inhale and search for it, unsure whether you detect it or imagine it. The air is already layered with smoke and wool. The baby stirs in the cradle but does not wake fully. You feel a protective instinct rise, irrational yet strong. The thought of tiny bites on such delicate skin unsettles you more than your own discomfort. There was a growing market in the later Victorian years for chemical powders and patent remedies promising to eradicate bedbugs. Advertisements boasted miraculous results. Whether these products were effective or simply hopeful illusions is another matter. The desire for a solution was clear. You scratch lightly at your wrist and then force yourself to stillness. Movement seems only to heighten awareness. Instead, you focus on breathing. In, out. The mattress rustles faintly beneath you. From outside comes the distant bark of a dog and the rumble of a late cart. The city continues its muted hum. Within the room, the struggle against unseen pests unfolds quietly, without tremor. There has long been conversation among scholars about how people in the past normalized discomforts that modern audiences would find intolerable. Bedbugs were not welcome, certainly, but they were endured. Complaints might be voiced, remedies attempted, yet life continued. You think of the weekly bath, the careful airing of the bedding, the effort to maintain some degree of cleanliness. These acts are not futile even if they cannot eliminate every nuisance. They represent agency within constraint. Gradually, your body begins to relax again. The initial shock of irritation fades into a dull background awareness. The blanket warms once more against your skin. The breathing around you steadies. Sleep, when it comes, is lighter than before. You drift on the surface rather than sinking deep, yet you drift nonetheless. In this small Victorian bedroom, rest is never pristine. It is negotiated with noise, with cramped quarters, and sometimes with tiny nocturnal intruders. As dawn approaches and the first grey light returns, you sit up again and inspect your wrist. A faint red mark confirms the night's visitor. You rub it absently and rise to begin another day. The mattress will be shaken, the bed frame perhaps examined. Life will proceed. And tonight, despite the memory of that subtle tickle, you will lie down once more, trusting that exhaustion will outweigh irritation. Front room lamplight casting a soft amber glow over worn furniture. As supper dishes are cleared, attention turns toward the familiar progression of bedtime. Yet tonight you notice something you have not examined closely before. What exactly do people wear to sleep in a house where space is scarce and modesty negotiable? You follow the family upstairs, once more aware of the quiet routine unfolding. The father removes his outer garments and hangs them carefully on a peg. Beneath his work clothes he wears a simple undershirt, thin and softened by repeated washing. This will serve as his nightwear. The mother loosens her dress and changes into a plain linen shift, practical rather than decorative. In many working-class Victorian homes, specialised nightclothes were minimal or non-existent, while wealthier families might own dedicated nightgowns or caps. Labouring households often relied on undergarments doubling as sleepwear. Textile inventories from the period show that garments were precious commodities worn thin before replacement. You sense how fabric itself is valued almost as much as wood. The children change quickly. Modesty maintained more by dim light and familiarity than by separate rooms. A small boy pulls on a long shirt that reaches nearly to his knees. A girl adjusts her chemise and smooths it down self-consciously before climbing into bed. There is a gentle awkwardness to these gestures, especially as children grow older. There is an intriguing note found in some social commentaries suggesting that nightcaps were surprisingly common among men, not for fashion, but for warmth. A simple cotton cap helped retain heat in chilly rooms where blankets were thin. You picture the father settling into bed with such a cap pulled low, ears tucked safely beneath. The candle flame flickers as someone moves past it. Shadows stretch across the walls, momentarily exaggerating forms before shrinking again. You feel how darkness itself becomes an ally of modesty. Once the light is extinguished, distinctions blur. A well-documented aspect of Victorian moral culture emphasises restraint and propriety. Yet within working-class homes, practicality often softened rigid expectations. Sharing beds and changing in close quarters required a certain matter-of-fact attitude. There was little room for elaborate privacy screens. You sit at the edge of the bed and observe how clothing is folded with care. Even worn garments are smoothed and placed neatly ready for morning. The habit reflects thrift and discipline. Nothing is tossed aside casually. There has been ongoing discussion among historians about how ideals of modesty filtered through different social classes. Did working families internalize middle-class standards, or did they adapt them selectively? As you watch the family move through their nightly routine, you see neither rebellion nor strict imitation. You see adaptation shaped by necessity. The baby, already in a soft gown, is swaddled loosely in a blanket before being placed in the cradle. The fabric is faded but clean from the recent Saturday wash. The scent of soap lingers faintly. You notice how the room cools quickly once outer garments are removed. Bare arms and legs feel the shift in temperature. The father pulls the blanket higher around his shoulders. The mother tucks an extra fold near the children's feet. There is a small but memorable detail recorded in some diaries describing how children occasionally resisted wearing nightshirts, preferring to sleep in day clothes for warmth. Parents balancing comfort and cleanliness negotiated these preferences carefully. Tonight compliance seems easy. Fatigue overrides argument. The candle is lowered and the flame pinched out. Darkness envelops the room almost instantly. You feel the shift from visible modesty to shadowed intimacy. In this space, bodies are simply bodies seeking rest. A faint draft slips beneath the door. You pull the blanket closer and feel the rough weave against your chin. The father's breathing steadies. A child whispers a brief question into the dark and receives a soft reply. There is thoughtful reflection among scholars about how clothing at night reflected broader economic realities. Limited wardrobes meant garments endured heavy use. Nightwear was not an expression of leisure, but an extension of practicality. You lie back and consider how different this is from the modern abundance of sleepwear options. Here a single shirt or shift must suffice, yet within that simplicity lies a kind of clarity. The goal is warmth, modesty enough to feel comfortable and nothing more. The mattress rustles as everyone settles. The shared bed creaks softly. In the darkness, the earlier irritations of bedbugs seem distant, overshadowed by the weight of the day. Outside, the faint breeze stirs the curtain. The room feels enclosed yet familiar. Clothing has been folded, bodies are arranged. Modesty, such as it is, rests lightly over the scene like the blanket itself. As you close your eyes, you recognize that even something as ordinary as nightclothes reveals the texture of working-class life. Fabric worn thin, garments repurposed, darkness serving as curtain. In this Victorian bedroom, rest arrives not dressed in luxury but in linen and necessity. Winter does not arrive gently in this neighbourhood. It presses in through cracks and keyholes, settles along windowsills and lingers in corners long after the fire has burned low. You feel its presence one evening as you climb the narrow stairs, breath faintly visible in the cooling air. Upstairs, the bedroom seems smaller somehow, as though the cold has tightened the very walls. The window is shut firmly now, curtains drawn thick against the dark. Even so, a draught slips through unseen seams, brushing your ankles with icy fingers. In many working-class Victorian homes, heating was limited to a single fireplace, usually downstairs. Bedrooms rarely had their own source of warmth. The heat that drifted upward from the hearth below dissipated quickly, leaving upper rooms chilly once the fire waned. You sense how this shapes bedtime habits. The father carries a small metal warming pan up the stairs, its lid perforated in decorative patterns. Inside, glowing embers rest carefully. He slides it between the blankets and moves it slowly across the mattress before removing it again. The fabric warms briefly enough to take the edge off the cold sheets. There is a vivid detail found in numerous accounts of the period describing how prized such warming pans were during harsh winters. Families without one sometimes used heated bricks wrapped in cloth to achieve a similar effect. You imagine the relief of sliding into a bed that is not shockingly cold against your skin. You slip beneath the blankets and feel the difference immediately. The mattress, still uneven with straw, seems firmer in the chill. The wool blanket is rough, but thick enough to trap a pocket of heat around your body. You curl instinctively, drawing knees toward chest to conserve warmth. A broadly accepted reality of 19th century life is that fuel costs weighed heavily on working families. Coal had to be purchased carefully rationed to stretch through long months. Allowing the fire to burn all night was rarely feasible. Instead, embers were banked and hope placed in layered bedding. The children climb into their places quickly tonight, eager to burrow under blankets. Their noses are pink from the cold. One child laughs as icy toes brush against a sibling's leg, then both settle with small shivers. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how severe winters affected urban mortality rates. Overcrowded, poorly insulated housing could exacerbate respiratory illnesses. As you lie here listening to the faint whistle of wind outside, you understand how fragile warmth can be. The father lies near the wall, his back forming a barrier against drafts. The mother positions the youngest child between them, creating a small island of shared heat. You feel the strategy in this arrangement. Bodies become insulation. A small but memorable observation from some Victorian letters describes how people sometimes wore extra layers to bed during extreme cold, including stockings and even coats. Tonight you sense that if the temperature drops further, such measures would not seem excessive. You pull the blanket up to your chin and feel the wool scratch lightly against your skin. Beneath it, the sheet holds a faint memory of the warming pan's heat already fading. The straw mattress does little to block the chill rising from below. Outside, the wind gathers strength, rattling something loose along the roofline. The sound is sharp, irregular. You hold still listening as it repeats and then subsides. Snow has not yet fallen, but frost traces delicate patterns along the inside of the window glass. There remains ongoing debate among scholars about the extent to which working families acclimatise physically to colder indoor temperatures compared to modern standards. Were they simply tougher, or did chronic chill take a hidden toll? As you tuck your hands beneath your arms for warmth, you feel both resilience and vulnerability. The baby stirs and lets out a soft cry, startled perhaps by the cold air. The mother responds instantly, adjusting blankets and drawing the child closer. Shared warmth steadies the infant's breathing once more. You think of the single fireplace downstairs embers now dimming to a faint glow. Its warmth cannot fully reach this upper room, and yet in this close cluster of bodies another source of heat emerges. Your own breath warms the space beneath the blanket. The father's steady respiration creates a gentle rhythm. A child presses closer, seeking comfort. A well-recorded aspect of Victorian winter life is the reliance on heavy curtains and layered textiles to keep drafts at bay. You glance toward the thick curtain by the window, grateful for its presence, even as a faint edge of cold sneaks around it. Gradually, the initial shock of the chill dulls. Your skin adjusts. The shared bed, once cramped, now feels like a small sanctuary against the wider cold. The mattress may be thin, the blankets worn, but together they create a fragile barrier. Outside, frost deepens. The street grows quiet under the weight of night. Within these walls, warmth is not abundant, but it is fiercely guarded. The wind sighs against brick and slate you. The wind sighs against brick and slate you drift into rest wrapped in wool and the shared breath of family. If winter presses in like a slow tightening fist, summer does the opposite. It expands, it swells, it lingers long after you wish it would retreat. You feel it one July evening as you climb the narrow stairs and the air upstairs meets you like a held breath that has nowhere to go. The bedroom is thick with warmth. The slate roof above has absorbed the day's sun and now releases it reluctantly, radiating downward into the cramped space. Even before you sit on the bed, a sheen of perspiration gathers at the back of your neck. Flutters weakly in a breeze that barely reaches this upper floor. The air carries scents from the street below, a mixture of dust horse and distant baking bread. By the mid-19th century, Britain experienced several notable heat waves that tested urban infrastructure. In densely packed neighbourhoods, heat accumulated between brick walls, turning small bedrooms into ovens by nightfall. You feel it now, the way the mattress seems to hold warmth rather than offer comfort. The children lie sprawled rather than curled limbs flung outward in search of cooler patches of sheet. The wool blanket has been folded at the foot of the bed, replaced by a lighter coverlet. Even so, the air feels close. A small but vivid detail from some personal letters of the period describes how families sometimes dampened sheets with cool water before bedtime in an attempt to lower body temperature. The effect was fleeting, but the initial relief could feel heavenly. You imagine that coolness now against overheated skin. The father loosens his shirt and lies back with a low sigh. His skin glistens faintly in the dim light. The mother fans herself with a folded newspaper for a few moments before surrendering to stillness. Movement only seems to stir warmer air. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how seasonal extremes affected sleep patterns before the widespread adoption of modern climate control. In summer, rest could become shallow and fragmented, particularly in upper rooms beneath poorly insulated roofs. As you shift on the mattress, you sense how difficult it is to find a comfortable position. Outside windows along the street stand open. Voices drift upward, more clearly than in colder months. A neighbour laughs loudly. Somewhere a harmonica plays a wandering tune. The city feels restless, unwilling to settle. The baby, sensitive to the temperature changes, fusses in the cradle. The mother rises and lifts the child, wiping a damp forehead gently with the corner of her shift. Even in the heat, the closeness of bodies remains necessary. A well-established feature of Victorian urban life is that access to green space was limited for many working families. Escaping the heat often meant lingering outside until late, seeking any stray breeze in a narrow yard or along a slightly wider street. Yet once indoors, relief was partial at best. You lie back and feel the mattress warm beneath you. Straw, which insulated so well in winter, now traps heat. You turn the pillow over in search of a cooler side. For a moment it offers mild comfort before warming again. There is an intriguing anecdote from some seaside towns where families who could afford the journey would travel briefly to the coast during extreme heat, sleeping near open windows to catch ocean air. For most urban workers, such escape remained a distant luxury. From the street comes the clip of hooves and the creak of a late carriage. The air feels alive with motion, yet stagnant at the same time. You sense how some air nights lengthen, stretching wakefulness. There has been ongoing reflection among scholars about how industrial cities amplified seasonal discomfort compared to rural areas. Brick and stone absorb and release heat differently than open fields. As you lie beneath this slate roof, you understand the contrast without needing to see it. Eventually, fatigue overcomes discomfort. The room does not cool significantly, but your body adjusts in small increments. Sweat dries slowly on your skin, breathing steadies. The window admits a faint current that brushes your cheek. It carries with it the layered scent of the neighbourhood, less sharp than in winter, more humid. Somewhere nearby, someone splashes water in a basin, perhaps attempting their own version of relief. You close your eyes and focus on that small movement of air. The harmonica tune drifts farther away. Voices soften. Even the restless city begins to tire. Summer sleep in this Victorian bedroom is lighter, thinner, stretched across hours of warmth. Yet it comes nonetheless. Bodies sprawl blankets lie forgotten at the bed's edge, and the night presses gently but persistently. And beneath the lingering heat of the day you drift into uneasy rest, aware that when morning comes, the room will once again glow with the stored warmth of the sun. On certain evenings, the pattern of the household shifts before anyone says a word. You sense it in the way the mother glances toward the door a little more often, in the way the children ask quiet questions about whether their father will be late. The air carries a faint undercurrent of anticipation. The public house down the street glows warmly as dusk settles its windows bright with lamplight and conversation. For many working men in Victorian Britain, the tavern offered more than drink. It provided fellowship, warmth, and a temporary escape from the relentless pace of labour. After days spent in factories or on docks, the pull of shared laughter could be strong. You remain upstairs as the children are tucked into their places. The mother moves through the routine with steady hands, yet her ear tilts toward the street. The father has not yet returned. His boots do not thud against the step. His cough does not echo in the hall. A widely noted aspect of 19th century urban life is the prominence of public houses as social centres, particularly in working-class districts. Reformers often criticised them as sites of excess, while patrons defended them as necessary spaces of community. The truth likely contained elements of both. You lie down and listen. The mattress rustles. The baby shifts in the cradle. Outside, the soundscape differs from previous nights. Laughter spills more freely from the direction of the tavern. Snatches of song float upward uneven, but spirited. There is a small but telling detail in some contemporary reports describing how children could identify the mood of a returning parent by the rhythm of footsteps on the pavement. A steady, measured tread suggested sobriety. A slower, uneven pattern hinted at drink. You find yourself listening for that rhythm now. The mother extinguishes the candle and settles beside the children rather than in her usual place. She remains half upright, propped on an elbow. Sleep will not claim her fully until the door below opens. There has been considerable discussion among historians about the role of alcohol in working-class culture during the Victorian era. Was it primarily a source of solace in harsh conditions, or did it exacerbate domestic tensions? As you lie in the dimness, you sense how the answer might shift from one household to another. Footsteps approach at last. They are not erratic, but slightly heavier than usual. The latch lifts. The door closes with more force than necessary. You hear the father's voice murmur something indistinct downstairs. Up the narrow staircase he comes, boots placed carefully but not perfectly aligned with the centre of each step. The wood creaks in familiar protest. When he enters the room, the faint scent of ale accompanies him, mingling with wool and smoke. He pauses briefly, perhaps to let his eyes adjust, perhaps to gauge whether anyone is awake. The mother's outline shifts slightly in acknowledgement. No sharp words pass between them. Instead, there is a quiet understanding shaped by repetition. A firmly grounded observation about Victorian domestic life is that evenings were often the only time families gathered together. If part of that time was spent in a public house, it altered the rhythm of home. Tonight the father moves more slowly as he undresses, placing his boots with less precision than usual. He lies down at the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the baby. The mattress dips under his weight. For a moment the air feels charged with unspoken emotion. Then his breathing deepens and the tension eases. Outside the tavern's noise continues for a while longer, before tapering off. Doors close along the street. Voices fade. You reflect on how such nights could carry many outcomes. In some households, drink might lead to raised voices or worse. In others, it might simply soften edges after a brutal week. The spectrum of experience was wide. There is an intriguing anecdote from certain reform tracts describing temperance meetings, where former patrons spoke of reclaiming evenings for family life. Whether those transformations were common or exceptional remains debated among scholars. Here in this small bedroom, the father's late return has not shattered the night. It has merely shifted it slightly. The mother eventually lies back, fully satisfied that he is home and safe. You feel the mattress settle once more as bodies find their positions. The scent of ale fades, gradually replaced again by the familiar blend of straw and soap. The children remain asleep throughout, unaware of the subtle undercurrent that rippled through the room. For them, the night continues unbroken. You close your eyes and consider how rest is intertwined with choices made beyond these walls. The glow of the public house, the companionship it offers, the risks it carries all shape the atmosphere of this small space upstairs. As breathing steadies again and the last distant laugh dissolves into silence, the room returns to its ordinary rhythm. The father's presence, even if slightly delayed, completes the familiar arrangement of warmth. And in this Victorian household, night absorbs both routine and deviation, folding them gently into the shared act of sleep. Some nights carry a different weight from the moment you lie down. The air feels thicker, not from heat or smoke, but from worry. You sense it before you fully understand why. A cough breaks the darkness, sharper and more persistent than the usual clearing of a throat. You open your eyes and listen. The sound comes again from the pallet in the corner, where one of the older children sleeps. It is not the brief cough of dust irritation. It lingers, rattling faintly in the chest. The child turns and draws a shaky breath before coughing once more. Illness was an ever-present companion in Victorian Britain, particularly in crowded urban neighbourhoods. Respiratory infections, influenza, and more serious diseases such as tuberculosis moved easily through close quarters. Medical understanding was evolving, but effective treatments remained limited. You feel how vulnerability threads through this small room. The mother is awake instantly. She rises without lighting a candle, navigating by memory. Her hand rests on the child's forehead. You watch her posture change as she gauges warmth. Too hot, not yet burning, but warmer than comfort allows. There is a quiet exchange of whispers between the parents. The father shifts closer, his earlier fatigue replaced by alertness. You sense how quickly sleep evaporates when illness intrudes. A widely accepted feature of working-class domestic life during this period is that sick family members were typically cared for at home. Hospitals existed, but access was uneven and often reserved for the most severe cases. The bedroom thus became not only a place of rest, but a makeshift infirmary. The mother brings a small basin of water upstairs, cloth folded neatly over its edge. She dampens it and presses it gently against the child's forehead. The gesture is tender and practiced. Perhaps this is not the first fever this household has faced. There is a poignant detail found in some 19th century diaries describing how families would burn herbs or vinegar in attempts to cleanse the air around a sickbed. The scent, sharp and medicinal, was believed to ward off contagion. You almost expect such an aroma to rise now, though the room smells only of wool and lingering smoke. You sit upright, aware that the usual rhythm of shared sleep has shifted into watchfulness. The baby stirs at the disturbance but does not fully wake. The lodger on his narrow strip of floor remains still, perhaps pretending sleep out of respect for the family's privacy. Scholars continue to examine how working families interpreted illness in an era when germ theory was only gradually gaining acceptance. Some attributed sickness to foul air, others to divine will, others still to simple misfortune. In this moment, theory feels distant. The child's uneven breathing commands all attention. The father rises and retrieves a small bottle from the chest of drawers. The contents are unclear in the dark, perhaps a tonic recommended by a neighbour or purchased from a local chemist. He pours a careful measure into a spoon and offers it gently. A mainstream observation drawn from public health records of the time shows that child mortality rates were significantly higher than modern standards. Such statistics hover invisibly over scenes like this, adding gravity to every cough. You watch the mother settle beside the sick child on the pallet, abandoning her place in the main bed. She strokes hair damp with sweat and hums a low melody, more vibration than tune. The father remains seated nearby, elbows on knees, waiting. Time stretches. The room is silent except for the child's breathing and the faint crackle of embers downstairs. You feel how fragile rest becomes when illness and omniscience enters. Sleep will not come easily tonight. There is thoughtful debate among historians about the emotional toll of recurrent sickness in crowded districts. Did repeated exposure foster stoicism, or did it carve deep lines of anxiety beneath everyday resilience? As you sit in the dimness, you sense both acceptance and fear coexisting. The child coughs again, then settles slightly. The fever does not spike further. The damp cloth is refreshed. A whispered prayer slips from the mother's lips, barely audible. Gradually the intensity eases. The cough spaces out. The child's breathing evens, though still heavier than usual. The father exhales slowly, touching, leaving his shoulders in increments. You lie back down but remain alert, attuned to every shift in sound. The mattress beneath you feels less important now. The warmth of shared bodies is overshadowed by the warmth of fever. A minor but evocative note from certain reformers who stare mentions how sickbeds were sometimes moved closer to windows in hopes that fresh air would aid recovery. You glance toward the shuttered window and imagine opening it slightly despite the chill. Eventually the mother allows herself to recline beside the child, one arm draped protectively. The father returns to his place, though his breathing remains lighter than usual. The room regains a fragile quiet. Outside, the city hum continues indifferent to this small drama. Within these walls, however, rest has been transformed into vigilance. You close your eyes, once more aware that in Victorian Britain sleep and sickness often shared the same narrow bed, and as you drift cautiously towards slumber, you carry the hope that by morning the fever will have loosened its grip. In the quieter weeks when no fever lingers and wages have stretched just far enough, the different kind of wakefulness sometimes settles over the room. It is softer than illness, less urgent than hunger. You sense it in the way two older children whisper a little longer than usual before sleep claims them. Courtship in a working-class Victorian household rarely unfolded beneath chandeliers or in manicured gardens. It existed in narrow streets and doorways, and sometimes in the very room where the rest of the family slept. Privacy was scarce, yet affection found its paths regardless. You lie in the shared bed and notice a faint shift in atmosphere. The eldest daughter, no longer quite a child, has been quieter lately. When a certain young man passes the house, her posture changes almost imperceptibly. Tonight, as the family settles, you hear a soft tap at the window below. The father stirs but does not rise. He knows that sound. It is not a threat, it is the cautious signal of a suitor hoping for a brief word before full darkness. A broadly documented feature of 19th century working class life is that courtship was often supervised either directly or indirectly. Parents maintained a watchful presence, yet opportunities for brief exchanges still arose. You feel the delicate balance between oversight and youthful longing. The daughter slips from the pallet and moves quietly toward the staircase. The mother opens one eye but says nothing. There is an understanding here, unspoken but firm. She will not be gone long. From your place in the dim room you hear the faint murmur of voices below. The front door remains closed. Instead, conversation takes place through the small gap of a partially opened window. Words are indistinct, but the tone carries warmth and nervous energy. There is a charming detail recorded in some memoirs describing how young couples developed elaborate systems of signals from specific knocks to handkerchiefs displayed at windows to communicate interest. In crowded neighbourhoods, creativity compensated for lack of space. You imagine the young man standing under the lamplight, cap in hand, boots polished as best he could manage. His day may have been long and physically taxing, yet he has made time for this small ritual. Upstairs, the rest of the family remains mostly still. The father clears his throat once a subtle reminder that boundaries exist. The younger children breathe steadily, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding. Historians continue to explore how the industrial schedules influence courtship patterns. With long workdays and limited leisure, romantic exchanges were compressed into brief evening windows. Did this intensify feeling or simply add strain? As you listen to the soft cadence of voices below you, sense both urgency and sincerity. After several minutes, the daughter returns. Her steps are light, almost floating. She slips back onto the pallet and pulls the blanket around her shoulders. In the darkness, you sense the faintest smile lingering. There is no grand declaration, no dramatic gesture. Instead, affection threads itself into ordinary nights. The shared bedroom absorbs it quietly, just as it absorbs coughs, laughter, and whispered prayers. A well-established aspect of Victorian social custom is that engagements often required practical considerations as much as romantic ones. A steady income, the possibility of securing separate lodgings, the approval of parents all shaped decisions. Love alone did not guarantee a shared future bed. You lie back and consider how sleep might feel different for someone newly in love. The mattress may be just as lumpy, the room just as crowded, yet dreams take on new colour. Anticipation can warm even a chilly night. From outside comes the fading echo of departing footsteps. The young man has gone, swallowed by the street's dim glow. The lamplight flickers and steadies again. There is a gentle rustle as the daughter shifts once more. Perhaps she replays the conversation in her mind. Perhaps she counts the days until the next meeting. The room, though unchanged, feels momentarily expanded by possibility. Scholars have long debated how much emotional intimacy flourished within the constraints of working-class domestic life. Were such households too burdened for romance to bloom freely, or did shared hardship intensify bonds? As you rest in the dark, you sense that affection persists even in narrow quarters. Gradually the heightened awareness dissolves. The daughter's breathing evens. The father settles deeper into his pillow. The mother adjusts the baby's blanket without fully waking. Night resumes its familiar rhythm. Yet something subtle has shifted. Within these brick walls, alongside labour and illness and weekly baths, there is also courtship. There are promises murmured through cracked windows and smiles hidden in shadow. You close your eyes and allow the room's warmth to envelop you. In Victorian Britain, even in the most crowded bedrooms, hearts find room to stir, and as sleep returns, it carries with it the quiet glow of possibility. On some evenings, before the candle is pinched out and the room sinks into shadow, there is a pause that feels almost ceremonial. You notice it as the family gathers as upstairs, movements slowing, voices lowering. The day's practical concerns soften, replaced by something quieter. The mother kneels beside the bed first. Her hands fold together, fingers interlaced with familiarity. The children follow in varying degrees of seriousness. One bows their head deeply. Another peeks through half-closed eyes. The father removes his cap and stands at the foot of the bed, posture straight despite fatigue. Faith weaves gently through this household, not as a grand spectacle, but as a nightly thread. In Victorian Britain, religious observance was deeply embedded in everyday life across social classes. For working families, especially church attendance and personal prayer offered structure and reassurance amid uncertainty. You feel how this ritual frames the transition from wakefulness to rest. The mother begins with the simple prayer, words spoken softly but clearly, gratitude for the day's safety, a request for protection through the night, a plea for health, especially after recent illness. The children echo certain phrases, some confidently, others mumbling through memorized lines. There is a modest yet intriguing detail found in various accounts of the era, describing how some families kept small devotional cards or illustrated Bible pages near the bed. These images, often worn at the edges, served as visual anchors in dim rooms. You glance toward the wall and imagine such a print tucked discreetly beside the window. You bow your head with them, feeling the shift in atmosphere. The room, cramped and imperfect, takes on a sense of calm focus. Outside, the city hum continues, but it feels distant for these few minutes. A broadly acknowledged aspect of 19th century culture is that Sunday sermons often emphasize the sanctity of the home and the moral duty of parents to guide their children spiritually. This influence trickled into nightly routines, shaping habits that endured even in the smallest dwellings. The father clears his throat gently and adds a brief line of his own voice, low and steady. His words are fewer, perhaps less polished, but sincere. You sense how this shared act reinforces connection. In a world where so much lies beyond control, prayer becomes a form of quiet assertion. There has been ongoing reflection among historians about how religious belief intersected with working-class identity during the Victorian era. Some argue that faith provided solace and community. Others suggest it could reinforce acceptance of hardship. As you kneel in the dim light, the experience feels neither purely comforting nor restrictive. It simply is. The baby stirs during the final lines, emitting a soft coo that blends unexpectedly with the cadence of prayer. A small smile flickers across the mother's face before she resumes her solemn tone. Once the last word is spoken, there is a brief silence. Not the heavy quiet of tension, but a gentle stillness. Then movements resume. Blankets are drawn up. The candle flame flickers one final time before being extinguished. Darkness settles fully, yet something lingers in the air, a sense of having marked the night with intention. You lie back and feel the mattress beneath you, aware that the same uneven straw now supports not only bodies, but whispered hopes. In some neighbourhoods, church bells could be heard faintly even at late hours, especially on special occasions. Their distant tolling would carry across rooftops a reminder of shared belief. Tonight no bell sounds, but the memory of its echo seems present. A well-documented feature of Victorian spiritual life is the popularity of hymns sung at home, not only in the church. You recall hearing the family hum a familiar tune earlier in the week, voices uneven yet earnest. Music like prayer softened the edges of crowded rooms. The father shifts slightly, his earlier authority replaced by the vulnerability of sleep. The mother's breathing deepens. A child whispers a final question into the dark, perhaps about angels or heaven, and receives a murmured reassurance. There is thoughtful discussion among scholars about how bedtime rituals shape children's emotional security. Did consistent prayer instill comfort, or did fear of divine judgment intrude upon dreams? As you drift closer to sleep, the dominant sensation is one of steadiness rather than dread. The room feels smaller in darkness, yet also more unified. The act of kneeling together has drawn invisible lines of connection between each sleeper. Outside of how, a faint breeze stirs the curtain. The world continues its restless motion. Within these walls, however, the night has been entrusted to something larger than brick and mortar. You close your eyes and allow the quiet to deepen. In this Victorian household, faith is not ornate. It does not require elaborate altars or grand gestures. It rests in folded hands, whispered words, and the belief that even in cramped quarters the night can be held safely. And as breathing steadies once more, prayer gives way to sleep, carrying with it the soft reassurance that tomorrow will arrive in its appointed time. Even with prayer spoken and blankets tucked close, the night is not always entirely gentle. There are moments when the darkness itself seems to carry stories whispered long before you arrived in this narrow bedroom. You lie awake for a while, listening to the subtle creaks of the house as it settles. A beam contracts with a faint pop. The wind slides along the roof and produces a low moan that could almost be mistaken for a distant voice. In the half-sleep state between waking and dreaming, imagination grows bold. Children in Victorian Britain, like children in any era, absorb tales from older siblings, neighbours, and cheap printed pamphlets. Ghost stories circulated easily in crowded districts, passed from mouth to mouth. A widely recognised element of the 19th century popular culture was the fascination with spirits' omens and supernatural visitations. Even practical households were not entirely immune to such ideas. On the pallet in the corner, one child shifts suddenly and whispers something about a shadow near the door. The words are hushed but urgent. You sense the ripple of unease that follows. The mother responds calmly, her voice low and steady. She attributes the shadow to the curtain moving in the draught. She reaches out and smooths the blanket, grounding the child in touch rather than imagination. There is an intriguing detail recorded in some Victorian memoirs describing how certain families avoided speaking of specific superstitions after dark, fearing that naming a spirit might invite it closer. Whether these beliefs were deeply held or half playful is difficult to determine, yet they shape the texture of nighttime conversation. You glance toward the door and see only the faint outline of furniture in dim light. Still, you understand how easily shapes transform into in the darkness. A coat hanging from a peg becomes a looming figure. A shifting curtain mimics a silent intruder. Scholars have long debated the extent to which superstition persisted among working-class communities during the rapid modernisation of the Victorian era. As scientific explanations gained ground, older beliefs did not vanish overnight. Instead, they coexisted, sometimes uneasily. The father clears his throat once, a practical sound that cuts through tension. He mutters something reassuring about solid locks and sturdy walls. The bolt on the door downstairs has been secured. The windows are latched. The physical world offers its own comfort, yet stories linger. From outside comes the sudden clatter of something overturned, perhaps a stray cat disturbing a bin. The noise is sharp and unexpected. A child gasps softly. You feel your own pulse quicken before reason catches up. The mother's hand finds the child's shoulder again. She whispers a simple explanation. Animals, wind, nothing more. A well-documented feature of Victorian urban life is that nights can be genuinely dangerous, with crime rates fluctuating and dimly lit streets offering concealment. Fear was not entirely irrational. But within this small room, practical measures have been taken. The family relies on bolt latch and proximity. There is a minor but vivid anecdote from some 19th century writings describing how children would sometimes tuck small objects beneath their pillows for protection, perhaps a button from a loved one's coat or a scrap of ribbon blessed at church. You imagine such talismans hidden beneath the straw-filled mattress. Gradually the tension eases. The house resumes its ordinary nighttime sounds. The beam no longer pops. The wind quiets. You reflect on how darkness amplifies both sound and imagination. In daylight, the same coat on the peg would appear harmless. At night, it acquires possibility. There has been thoughtful reflection among historians about how urbanization altered traditional folklore. Did crowded cities dilute old beliefs, or did they provide fertile ground for new ones? In this bedroom, superstition feels less like doctrine and more like a passing shiver. The child who whispered about shadows shifts closer to a sibling. Shared warmth counters imagined threat. Breathing steadies again. You lie back and focus on the tangible elements around you. The coarse weave of the blanket, the solid line of the wall at your back, the gentle rise and fall of the father's chest. Outside, a distant watchman calls the hour once more. His voice is firm, human, unmistakable. It cuts through lingering unease like a thread of certainty. The room settles fully. The earlier flicker of fear dissolves into ordinary fatigue. Darkness remains, but it no longer feels animated. You close your eyes and allow sleep to reclaim its place. In this Victorian household, night holds both stories and reality. Superstitions may flutter at the edges, but shared presence and simple reassurance anchor the room. And as the hours pass, even the shadows grow tired, leaving you to drift into a calmer, deeper rest. Before the sky has even begun to pale, before the shapes in the room separate themselves from shadow, a sound cuts cleanly through the last layer of sleep. It is not a whisper this time, nor a cough, nor the wind nudging the roof. It is the factory bell. The note carries across rooftops with metallic authority, a sharp clang that seems to vibrate in your ribs. You feel it before you fully wake. Around you, bodies tense in near unison. This sound is not optional. By the mid-19th century, factory bells and whistles structured daily life in industrial towns with almost military precision. Shifts began early, sometimes as early as 5 or 6 in the morning, and lateness could mean lost wages or worse. Time once measured loosely by sun and season had become mechanical and exact. The father inhales sharply and sits up at once. There is no lingering in bed, no slow negotiation with comfort. The mattress rustles as he swings his legs to the floor. The room is still dark enough that outlines blur together. A child groans softly from the pallet. Not all children work in factories, but many do, especially in earlier decades of the century before stricter regulations took hold. Even those attending school must rise early to help with chores. Sleep feels unfinished. You push yourself upright and feel the lingering warmth beneath the blanket vanish almost instantly. The air bites at exposed skin, the window remains shut against the chill, yet the bell's echo seems to slip through brick. There is a small but striking detail preserved in some worker testimonies describing how the factory bell could invade dreams, blending into them before dragging the sleeper fully awake. You can imagine it now, a metallic clang woven into some half-formed vision before reality asserts itself. The mother lights a candle with practiced speed. The flame flares and steadies, casting gold across tired faces. Movements are economical, shirts are pulled on, boots located by touch. There has been considerable scholarly reflection on how industrial time reshaped human biology. Did early rising and long hours permanently alter sleep patterns, or did families adapt more flexibly than we assume? As you fumble for your clothing in dim light, you sense both adaptation and strain. The father washes quickly at the basin, splashing cold water across his face. The shock seems to snap him into fuller wakefulness. He runs damp fingers through his hair and reaches for his cap. The children move more slowly. One rubs eyes with small fists. Another sits motionless for a moment, gathering resolve. You recognize that particular pause. The body knows it has not slept enough. A widely acknowledged reality of Victorian factory life is that workdays could stretch to 10 or 12 hours, particularly before reforms shortened them. Such length left little margin for extended rest. Even with Sunday respite, fatigue accumulated. Downstairs, the hearth is coaxed into brief life to warm a simple breakfast. Porridge is eaten quickly, spoons clinking softly against bowls. Conversation is minimal, energy must be conserved. You stand near the door as the father prepares to step back into the grey morning. Outside, other doors open along the street in near synchrony. Figures emerge like shadows moving with shared purpose toward the same destination. There is an intriguing anecdote from certain industrial towns about workers setting their own small alarms in addition to the factory bell, sometimes using wound clocks or even relying on a neighbour's knock. Oversleeping carried real consequences. The father steps into the street and joins the flow. The sound of boots on cobbles merges into a steady rhythm. The bell no longer rings, yet its command lingers in the air. Inside, the children finish their breakfast and gather their things. One glances longingly at the bed upstairs before turning away. The mattress, lumpy and imperfect, suddenly seems inviting in memory. Historians continue to discuss whether industrial discipline fostered a new sense of punctuality that permeated domestic life. Did households become more rigid in response to factory schedules? As you watch the morning unfold, it feels less like rigidity and more like inevitability. The mother remains behind for a moment once the others have left. She stands still in the quiet kitchen, listening to the fading footsteps. Then she begins her own tasks, which will stretch across the day without the punctuation of a bell. Upstairs, the bedroom stands temporarily empty. The blankets are rumpled. The straw mattress holds the imprint of bodies that have already moved on. You imagine how different mornings once were in rural cottages when dawn itself dictated the start of labour. Here metal and steam have claimed that authority. The sky outside lightens, gradually revealing rooftops coated in soot. Smoke begins to rise from chimneys once more. The day asserts itself fully. You feel the echo of the bell still vibrating faintly in your mind. It is the sound that ends dreams and summons effort. In this Victorian neighbourhood, a rest must yield quickly to work, and as you step out into the morning chill, you carry with you the knowledge that tonight, when darkness falls again, the same bell will be waiting at the edge of sleep, ready to pull you back into the rhythm of industrial time. One evening, as the light softens and the familiar street hum quiets, you allow your mind to wander beyond brick and smoke. Imagine stepping away from this industrial row and travelling outward past factories and rail lines into open countryside. The rhythm of sleep changes there, though not always in the ways you might expect. You find yourself standing before a small rural cottage, walls whitewashed, roof thatched or tiled in uneven lines. The air smells different here. Instead of coal smoke, there is damp earth hay and the faint sweetness of livestock nearby. The silence feels wider, less layered. Inside the cottage is not necessarily larger than the urban terrace you know so well. Many rural labourers in Victorian Britain lived in modest two-room dwellings, sometimes with only a single upstairs chamber for sleeping. Yet the arrangement feels subtly altered by environment. A well-established observation drawn from 19th century surveys is that agricultural workers often endured poverty comparable to their urban counterparts. Romantic images of pastoral life can obscure the reality of low wages and cramped housing. You step inside and see the same negotiation of space. The bed stands against a sloping wall beneath the eaves. Its mattress may also be stuffed with straw, though perhaps fresher from nearby fields. The scent is lighter, less tinged with soot. A small window opens onto open land rather than a narrow alley. You inhale deeply and feel the difference in air quality. There is dampness, certainly, and the earthy smell of animals carried on breeze, but it lacks the metallic bite of factory smoke. Children here may still share beds, their limbs tangled in familiar patterns. Parents lie close, conserving warmth during long winters, when frost creeps across fields as readily as across city rooftops. There is a charming detail found in some rural recollections describing how families would sometimes store apples or herbs in loft spaces, their faint fragrance drifting into sleeping areas. You imagine a subtle sweetness hanging in the night air. The soundscape differs markedly. Instead of factory whistles and rumbling carts, you hear the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional bark of a farm dog, and wind moving freely across open land. When rain falls, it drums against the roof in a more pronounced rhythm, unsoftened by surrounding buildings. Scholars continue to explore whether rural populations experienced more restorative sleep due to reduced industrial noise, or whether the physical demands of agricultural labour left them equally exhausted. As you lie on this imagined straw mattress, you sense that fatigue feels universal even if its causes differ. A broadly acknowledged feature of country life is the reliance on natural light cycles. Without factory bells dictating shifts, sunrise and sunset exert stronger influence. You picture waking to the gradual brightening of sky rather than a metallic clang. Yet rural sleep carried its own challenges. Dampness could seep into walls. Vermin were no strangers here either, especially where grain and animals were stored nearby. You feel the rough weave of a blanket and recognise the familiar scratch against skin. There has been ongoing discussion among historians about how migration from countryside to city altered family structures and daily rhythms. Did those who moved miss the open air at night, or did urban wage outweigh nostalgia? As you compare the two settings, you sense both longing and practicality intertwined. In this cottage, the bed may be positioned near a small hearth that warms the lower room heat, rising more effectively in a compact space. The upstairs chamber still cools quickly once the fire fades, but perhaps the absence of soot allows windows to open more freely in warmer months. You listen to crickets outside their stick-coldy chorus, replacing the distant hum of machinery. The darkness feels deeper here, less pierced by the lamp-lidded light from neighbouring houses. A modest but telling note from some Victorian rural accounts mentions how families sometimes rose briefly during the night to check livestock during lambing season or storms. Sleep, even in quiet countryside, was not always uninterrupted. You turn on your side and feel the straw mattress shift beneath you, just as it did in the city. The sensation is strangely familiar, Baba. Despite differences in sound and scent, the fundamental elements of rest remain constant. Shared warmth, limited space, simple materials. Morning in this cottage would arrive with birdsong rather than factory bells, yet labour would follow swiftly. Fields require attention early, and daylight is precious. As you allow this rural scene to settle around you, you recognise that working-class sleep in Victorian Britain was shaped by environment but constrained by similar economic realities. Whether under slate roof blackened by smoke or thatch scented with hay, families negotiated rest within narrow margins. The imagined cottage fades gradually, and you find yourself once more in the small urban bedroom. The comparison lingers though. The city may hum more loudly, the airway heavier, but the core experience of shared beds and practical routines binds countryside and town together. And as night deepens, once again you carry with you the quiet knowledge that across Britain, from factory rows to rural lanes, working families lie down on straw-filled mattresses seeking the same fragile gift of sleep. There is one more place you must step into, though it feels colder before you even cross the threshold. Not a cottage, not a family terrace, but an institution, a workhouse. You approach it at dusk, its brick facade looming heavier than the homes you have come to know. Windows are high and narrow, the yard is bare. Even the air seems restrained, as though sound itself must request permission to pass through the piers. Workhouses expanded significantly after the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834, designed to provide relief to the destitute under deliberately austere conditions. The principle was clear: life inside should be less desirable than the lowest paid labour outside. Sleep here reflects that philosophy. You step into a dormitory and feel the difference immediately. Rows of narrow bedsteads stretch across the room with strict alignment. Each holds a thin mattress, often stuffed with straw or coarse fibre, covered by plain blankets. There is no clustering of family warmth here. A widely documented feature of workhouse life is the enforced separation of men, women and children. Families entering together were divided into different wards. The shared bed that once held parents and infants is replaced by institutional order. You run your hand across one of the mattresses. It feels firmer, less moulded by familiar bodies. The sheets, though washed regularly, carry a faint institutional sense of soap, layered over something harder to define. There is a small but striking detail found in some first-hand accounts describing how silence was expected in dormitories after a certain hour. Whispering could be reprimanded. Sleep, though communal in space, was isolated in spirit. You imagine lying here without the comforting rhythm of the known breathing beside you. Instead, dozens of strangers occupy identical beds, each turned toward their own thoughts. The windows are positioned high along the wall, limiting outside views. Ventilation exists, but the air feels cooler and less personal. The room echoes faintly with each movement. There has been considerable debate among historians about whether workhouses truly reduced poverty or merely punished it. Conditions were intentionally strict, yet for some, the workhouse offered shelter and regular meals. Sleep here may have been more secure from street dangers, but less secure emotionally. You sit on the edge of one narrow bed and picture a mother in the women's ward, wondering whether her child sleeps well in the children's night section. The enforced separation alters not only waking life, but the texture of night. A broadly recognised aspect of workhouse routine is the early rising bell, similar in authority to factory whistles. Time is regulated carefully. Lights out occurs at a set hour. There is little room for personal ritual. You glance along the rows and notice how identical each bed appears. No small devotional card tacked near the wall. No extra coat draped at the foot in a particular way. Uniformity replaces individuality. An intriguing anecdote from some former inmates recounts how they would sometimes count the creaks of neighbouring beds or listen for familiar coughs to anchor themselves in the dark. Even in enforced separation, the human need for connection sought small footholds. You lie back briefly and stare at the ceiling beams above. They are sturdy, functional, unadorned. The mattress beneath you is serviceable but offers no sense of belonging. In the urban home you left earlier, overcrowding created intimacy. Here order creates distance. Both arrangements limit privacy, yet in different ways. Scholars continue to examine how experiences in institutions shaped attitudes toward authority and domestic life among the poor. Did nights spent in regimented dormitories make family beds feel warmer by contrast, or did they erode the sense of home altogether? A faint cough echoes from the far end of the room. Someone shifts. The sound carries clearly in the disciplined silence. You imagine the lights being extinguished simultaneously, plunging the dormitory into the uniform darkness. No whispered courtship at the window. No spontaneous hum of a hymn. Only rows of bodies aligned under identical blankets. And yet even here sleep comes. It must. Exhaustion is impartial. Whether in a crowded family room or a workhouse ward, the body yields eventually. You rise from the bed and step back toward the doorway. The air feels cooler as you leave. Outside, the street hum resumes freer, less constrained. Returning in your mind to the small terrace house, you recognise how different forms of hardship shape rest. In the workhouse, deprivation is structured and visible. In the family home, it is woven into daily life, yet softened by familiarity. As you settle once more into the imagined warmth of shared blankets, you carry with you the stark memory of those aligned beds. And you understand that for many in Victorian Britain, the quality of sleep depended not only on mattress and air, but on whether one lay among kin or under institutional watch. Time does not stand still in this neighbourhood, even if the straw mattress and narrow staircase sometimes make it feel that way. As the decades progress, subtle changes begin to ripple through working-class districts. You notice them not all at once, but in small, almost tentative improvements that reshape the texture of night. It starts with whispers of reform. Local officials inspect housing more frequently. Pamphlets circulate discussing sanitation and ventilation. In some cities, new blocks of so-called model dwellings rise, promising cleaner air and slightly more space. You walk past one such building and observe its brickwork straighter and less stained than the older terraces. A firmly grounded historical development of the later Victorian period tears the growth of urban reform movements aimed at improving living conditions for the poor. Public health acts and housing initiatives sought to address overcrowding and inadequate sanitation. The results were uneven but visible in certain streets. Inside one of these newer dwellings, you climb a staircase that feels marginally wider. The bedroom remains small, yet the ceiling is a little higher. The window opens more smoothly, allowing better circulation. There is even a small vent near the top of the wall designed to encourage airflow. You run your hand across the wall and notice that damp patches are fewer. The floorboards fit more snugly together, reducing drafts. The mattress on the bed still contains straw, but it is more evenly distributed, perhaps replaced more recently. There is a curious detail found in some late 19th century reports describing how reformers measured the cubic feet of air per occupant in sleeping rooms, believing that quantifying space could lead to healthier nights. You imagine an inspector standing here with a notebook in hand calculating the invisible volume of breath. The family who lives in this improved room still shares the bed, but there is slightly more room to turn without bumping elbows. The children's pallet rests in a defined corner rather than wedged awkwardly near the door. There has been ongoing scholarly discussion about how much these reforms genuinely transform daily experience for working families. Some argue that improvements were modest and slow to spread. Others emphasize the psychological impact of brighter rooms and better ventilation. As you stand in this space, you sense how even small changes alter mood. The mother opens the window briefly before bedtime, and the air that enters feels less laden with smoke. Streets have been widened in certain districts, allowing light to reach lower floors. Sewers have been updated, reducing some of the lingering odours that once drifted upward at night. A widely acknowledged aspect of urban reform is the construction of public bathhouses and washhouses, granting families access to facilities beyond their cramped kitchens. Saturday night baths at home may still occur, but there are new options. You sit on the edge of the bed and feel the mattress beneath you. It still rustles faintly, but the lumps are less pronounced. The blanket appears newer, its weave tighter. There is a modest but telling note from some social observers describing how families in improved housing often took pride in keeping rooms tidy, sensing that better surroundings invited better habits. The act of making a bed neatly could feel like participation in progress. Outside the street, hum remains, yet it seems fractionally less oppressive. Gas lamps have been installed more consistently, casting steadier light. Crime may not have vanished, but illumination shifts perception. Historians continue to debate whether housing reform stemmed primarily from humanitarian concern or from a desire to maintain social order. Cleaner, better ventilated dwellings reduced disease outbreaks that affected entire cities. Motives intertwined. As the family settles for the night in this improved room, you notice how breathing feels easier. The window latch fits securely. The curtain moves gently in a deliberate draft, rather than an accidental leak. The father stretches out and remarks quietly on the difference, though his words are understated. The mother nods, smoothing the sheet with satisfaction. The children, accustomed to tighter quarters in earlier years, seem almost surprised by the extra inches of space. One turns over without jostling a sibling. It feels like a small luxury. You lie back and consider how reform does not erase hardship, but can soften its edges. The mattress remains simple. The day's labour remains demanding. Yet the night offers a slightly steadier refuge. There is thoughtful reflection among scholars about how incremental improvements in housing contributed to broader shifts in expectations. Once families experienced a room with better air, it became harder to accept less. Outside, the hum of the city continues its steady rhythm. Inside, the improved bedroom holds its occupants with marginally greater comfort. You close your eyes and sense how progress, even when gradual, can reshape sleep itself. In this evolving Victorian neighbourhood, the quality of rest begins to change, not dramatically, but enough to notice. And as the night deepens, you drift into slumber, aware that the story of working-class sleep is not static. It moves slowly and unevenly alongside the bricks and policies that frame it. As the century edges forward, you begin to notice something new appearing in shop windows along the high street. Between bolts of fabric and sturdy boots, there are polished bedsteads displayed with quiet confidence. Brass rails gleam in lamplight. Mattresses look thicker, more inviting than the familiar straw ticks you have known so well. Inside the small terrace house, change arrives more cautiously. The father lingers outside a furniture shop one evening, studying a printed notice in the window. It advertises payment by installment. A small sum each week, and the bed could be theirs. By the later Victorian decades, hire purchase arrangements became increasingly common, allowing working families to acquire goods they could not afford outright. Furniture including bedsteads and improved mattresses was often purchased this way. The promise of a proper bed held undeniable appeal. You sit at the kitchen table as the parents discuss the idea in low voices. Coins are counted carefully. Wages are measured against rent and coal. The decision is not romantic. It is calculated. There is a fascinating detail recorded in some advertisements of the era that described metal bedsteads as more hygienic than wooden frames less likely to harbour insects. After nights of battling bedbugs, such claims would have sounded persuasive. Weeks pass, coins change hands. At last, a delivery cart stops outside the house. Neighbours glance from windows as a new iron bed frame is carried carefully through the narrow doorway and up the stairs. The staircase groans under its weight. You follow closely, sensing the significance of this moment. The old wooden frame is dismantled and removed. In its place stands the new bed, modest yet undeniably sturdier. Its rails curve slightly at head and foot, catching candlelight with a subtle sheen. A broadly acknowledged shift in late 19th century domestic culture is the growing emphasis on cleanliness and modern materials. Iron bedsteads, sprung mattresses and improved bedding gradually entered working-class homes, though not universally or immediately. The mattress that accompanies the frame is thicker than the old straw tick. It may still contain natural fillings, but it feels more evenly packed. You press your palm against it and notice how it yields gently rather than sharply. There has been ongoing scholarly debate about whether the spread of such goods truly transformed working-class comfort or simply introduced new forms of financial strain through installment payments. As you watch the parents smooth the sheet across the new mattress, you sense both pride and apprehension. The children climb onto the bed, experimentally bouncing slightly before being gently scolded. The sensation is different. There is less rustle, less immediate contact with underlying wood. A small but charming anecdote appears in some oral histories describing how families sometimes delayed going to sleep on the first night with a new bed, simply sitting on it and admiring it as a symbol of progress. You can imagine that happening here. The old straw mattress, once serviceable, now seems thin by comparison. It is repurposed for the children's pallet or carried out entirely. Evening falls, and it is time to test the new arrangement properly. The family climbs in with unusual care. The father lies down and exhales slowly. The mother shifts and smiles faintly in the dark. You stretch out and feel the difference beneath your spine. The support is more consistent. When someone turns, the movement ripples less dramatically across the surface. A well-documented aspect of consumer culture in the later Victorian period is the increasing availability of mass-produced goods. Industrialization, which once dictated punishing work schedules, now also supplied affordable products that reshaped domestic life. Outside, the street hum continues as always. Inside, however, the bed feels like a quiet revolution. Scholars continue to examine how ownership of such items influenced self-perception among working families. Did acquiring a new bed foster a sense of upward mobility, even within modest means? As you lie here, you feel how tangible objects can alter mood. The blanket remains familiar, the room remains small, yet the foundation of sleep has shifted. You turn onto your side and notice how the mattress springs back gently rather than settling into a hollow. The children whisper about how soft it feels. The mother hushes them, though her voice carries warmth. There is still labour ahead tomorrow. The factory bell will ring as reliably as ever. But tonight the bed holds you with slightly greater kindness. You close your eyes and consider how progress enters a home not in grand speeches, but in iron rails and thicker padding. In this Victorian bedroom, rest evolves incrementally, shaped by coin payments and the quiet hope that comfort can improve. And as sleep claims you on this new mattress, you sense that even within narrow economic limits, change is possible one installment at a time. Even with a sturdier bed and a slightly smoother mattress night, does not belong equally to everyone in this house. As you settle into the improved frame, you begin to notice a pattern that has been present all along. While others sink into deeper sleep, one figure remains half awake more often than not. The mother. You lie still and observe how her rest unfolds in fragments. She is the last to close her eyes, ensuring the candle is properly extinguished and the door secure. She listens for the baby's breathing even before drifting off herself. Across Victorian Britain, women's labour extended well beyond visible daytime tasks. Domestic responsibilities stretched into the night, particularly for mothers with infants. A widely recognised reality of working-class life is that women frequently rose multiple times after dark to tend to children, even when they themselves faced early morning duties. The baby stirs just as the room settles. A soft whimper emerges from the cradle. The mother's eyes open instantly. She sits up without hesitation, lifting the child with gentle efficiency. Her movements are so practiced that they barely disturb the mattress. You watch her silhouette in the faint street glow that slips through the curtain. She rocks slowly, humming under her breath. The melody is barely audible, more vibration than song. It threads through the room like a quiet pulse. There is an evocative detail preserved in some personal letters describing how women often used the stillness of night to complete small tasks, mending a tear by lamplight while the rest of the family slept. Preparing dough for early baking. Night was not always solely for rest. The baby settles briefly, then fusses again. The mother adjusts her hold and murmurs soothing words. The father sleeps on his exhaustion, deeper and less easily interrupted. This division is not malicious. It is habitual. Scholars continue to reflect on how gender-shaped experiences of rest in the 19th century. Did women simply accept fragmented sleep as inevitable, or did they feel its strain more acutely than records suggest? As you observe this quiet vigilance, you sense both endurance and weariness. Eventually the child relaxes fully. The mother returns to the bed, but does not immediately close her eyes. Instead, she lies still, listening. A cough from the older child draws her attention. She waits, poised to rise again if needed. A broadly acknowledged aspect of Victorian domestic ideology praised women as guardians of the home, responsible for its moral and physical well-being. That responsibility extended into the small hours when others slept. You turn slightly and feel the mattress shift. The new bed frame creaks less than the old wooden one, yet it still carries sound. The mother freezes briefly, ensuring she has not woken anyone else. There is a modest but telling anecdote from some working-class memoirs in which grown children later recalled their mothers rising in darkness night after night long before they understood the cost of such vigilance. The memory lingered with gratitude. You consider how rest accumulates differently depending on who is permitted to remain undisturbed. The father's breathing is deep and steady. The children, once asleep, drift with little awareness of interruptions. The mother's sleep, by contrast, is light, always ready to fracture. Another soft sound from the cradle pulls her upright again. This time the baby requires feeding. She moves toward the window for a sliver of cooler air, careful not to let in too much night chill. There has been ongoing discussion among historians about the invisible labour embedded in women's nightly routines. It rarely appears in wage records or official documents, yet it shaped daily survival. You lie back and feel a quiet respect for the pattern unfolding beside you. The mattress may have improved, the bedding grown slightly thicker, but the distribution of rest remains uneven. At last, in the hour before dawn, the baby sleeps more soundly. The mother returns to her place and finally allows her breathing to deepen. Outside, the first faint signs of morning begin to stir. The factory bell has not yet rung, but it will soon. He realizes that when the day begins, her tasks will resume without acknowledgement of the hours already given. Breakfast must be prepared, clothes mended, floors swept. In this Victorian bedroom, progress has altered materials, but not entirely roles. The bed supports everyone equally in structure, yet not in opportunity for uninterrupted sleep. You close your eyes and listen to the soft chorus of breathing, aware that one voice has carried the night more heavily than the rest. And as you drift toward the last fragile minutes of rest before morning calls you, understand that within these shared blankets lies not only warmth, but quiet sacrifice. As years pass, the arrangement of bodies in the bedroom shifts again, not because of new furniture or reform, but because of time itself. One evening you notice an extra blanket folded carefully at the foot of the bed and a slower set of footsteps climbing the narrow staircase. An elderly relative has come to stay. Perhaps it's the father's mother, widowed and no longer able to manage alone. Perhaps an uncle whose strength has faded after decades of labour. In working-class Victorian families, multi-generational households were not uncommon, especially when economic survival depended on shared resources. A widely recognised demographic pattern of the era shows that older family members often lived with adult children rather than in separate residences. You watch as a small cot is positioned nearer the hearth downstairs, or if space allows, in the corner of the upstairs room. Tonight it stands beside the wall opposite the main bed, just far enough to avoid blocking movement. The elderly woman settles onto it with visible effort. Her hands, knotted from years of work, smooth the thin blanket across her lap. She moves more slowly than the others, each action measured. There is a faint scent of lavender clinging to her shawl, perhaps tucked into fabric as a modest comfort. A minor but charming detail from some 19th century recollections mentions older women keeping small sachets of herbs near their pillows, both for fragrance and in the belief that they aided sleep. The room feels fuller now. The extra cot narrows the path between bed and door, yet there is no complaint. Space is adjusted as it has always been. You lie back and listen to the new rhythm added to the nighttime chorus. The elderly relative's breathing is lighter, sometimes interrupted by a soft wheeze. Sleep at this age comes differently. It is shallower, more fragmented. A firmly grounded observation from Victorian medical literature notes that aging often brought reduced tolerance for cold. The extra blanket folded at the foot of the bed is not decorative. It will be layered over frail shoulders as temperatures drop. The children regard the newcomer with a mixture of curiosity and affection. They whisper questions before settling down. The grandmother, if that is who she is, responds with a brief story about her own childhood when candles were scarcer and beds even narrower. There has been thoughtful debate among historians about how the presence of elderly kin influenced domestic dynamics. Did it strengthen familial bonds through shared memory or strain limited resources further? As you observe this room, you sense the quiet weaving of generations. The candle is extinguished and darkness envelops the expanded household. Almost immediately, the elderly woman shifts and clears her throat. The sound is dry but gentle. You notice how the mother's ear tilts toward it, just as it does toward the baby's cries. Care extends in two directions now, toward youth and toward age. A well-documented aspect of working-class life is that formal retirement, as we understand it today, did not exist for many during the Victorian era. Older adults often worked as long as their bodies allowed, and when they could no longer do so, family became their support. In the dimness, the grandmother begins to murmur what sounds like a prayer, or perhaps a fragment of a hymn remembered from decades past. Her voice is thin but steady. You shift slightly and feel the mattress respond. The new iron frame creaks less than the old wooden one once did, but the added presence in the room changes the air. There is an intriguing anecdote from some oral histories describing how older relatives would sometimes wake very early before the rest of the household and sit quietly by the hearth reflecting in the dark. Sleep patterns shift with age, bending toward dawn. Tonight, however, she remains still after her brief murmur. The children's breathing steadies. The father turns once, then settles. Scholars continue to examine how intergenerational living shaped attitudes toward aging in the 19th century. Did constant proximity foster deeper respect, or did it reveal the hardships of growing old more starkly? In this room you sense tenderness tempered by practicality. The elderly woman coughs softly again. The mother rises and drapes the extra blanket across her shoulders without a word. The gesture is automatic, almost invisible. You close your eyes and reflect on how sleep here is no longer solely about recovering from the day's labour. It also becomes a measure of how gently time treats the body. Outside, the street hum has quieted to a low murmur. Within these walls, 3 generations rest beneath shared roof and thin plaster. As the night deepens, the breathing patterns merge into a layered rhythm. The grandmother's lighter breaths thread through the heavier ones of youth. In this Victorian bedroom space is stretched once more to accommodate aging limbs and memories of older nights. And as you drift into sleep, you carry with you the awareness that rest, like life itself, changes with time, yet remains something each generation seeks in the same dim hours before dawn. There are nights when the usual order loosens its grip. You sense it long before anyone climbs the stairs. The street outside hums with a brighter energy, voices overlapping in laughter rather than weary conversation. It might be Christmas Eve, or the night of a local fair, or some small celebration marking the end of a difficult season. Inside the house, supper stretches longer than usual. The father tells a story he has likely told before, yet the children listen as though it is new. The mother smiles more readily, her shoulders less tightly drawn. In Victorian Britain, holidays and feast days punctuated the working calendar with rare intervals of sanctioned leisure. A widely recognised aspect of 19th century social life is that even the poorest families marked certain occasions with extra food song or small decorations. These moments did not erase hardship, but they shifted its weight briefly. You follow the family upstairs later than usual. The candle burns lower wax pooling at its base. No one seems eager to extinguish it. The children whisper excitedly about gifts that might appear by morning, or about festivities in the street below. One child hums a carol under their breath, unable to contain the tune. There is a delightful detail found in some Victorian recollections describing how children would hang stockings by the hearth in hopes of small treats. In cramped homes, even that act required creative placement. You imagine a single stocking pinned carefully near the fire. Tonight, the usual insistence on immediate sleep relaxes. The father allows a few extra minutes of chatter. The mother does not hush as quickly. You lie back and notice how the mattress, though unchanged, feels lighter under shared anticipation. The room itself seems to expand. Expand with the collective excitement. Scholars continue to examine how festive traditions offered psychological relief in industrial communities. Did these brief respites strengthen resilience, or did they highlight the contrast with everyday scarcity? As laughter drifts upward from the street, you sense how joy and hardship coexist. Outside, music floats through the open window. Someone plays a fiddle, the notes uneven but spirited. A group of neighbours sing along, their voices blending imperfectly. A firmly grounded feature of Victorian urban culture is the communal nature of celebration. Streets themselves became gathering spaces during holidays, with decorations strung between buildings and vendors selling small treats. The baby, sensing unusual energy, resists sleep at first. The mother rocks gently, whispering that tomorrow will come soon enough. You watch the grandmother smile faintly in the dim light, perhaps remembering festivities from her own youth. Memory folds into present. There is a minor yet charming anecdote from some 19th century letters describing how families sometimes allowed children to sleep all together on festive nights, piling onto one mattress in deliberate defiance of routine. Whether this occurred here is uncertain, but the spirit feels similar. Eventually, fatigue begins to overtake excitement. One child yawns widely mid-sentence. Another's words trail off into soft breathing. The candle is extinguished at last, though not without a collective sigh. Darkness feels warmer tonight, less heavy. Outside, celebration continues for a while longer. Footsteps hurry past, a cheer rises and falls. You close your eyes and reflect on how rare these nights are. Most evenings revolve around labour and recovery. Tonight, rest follows laughter rather than exhaustion alone. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how shared festivities reinforced neighbourhood bonds. In densely populated districts, communal joy could spill easily from house to house. The father turns once and murmurs something contented, before drifting fully into sleep. The mother rests more deeply than on ordinary nights, reassured perhaps by the rare lightness in the air. The children, though, initially restless, settle into steady breathing. Even the baby sleeps soundly as though soothed by distant music. You lie still and allow the echoes of song to carry you gently toward dreams. In this Victorian bedroom, celebration has softened the edges of hardship, and as the night advances, you understand that rest does not always stem from routine alone. Sometimes it follows shared joy rising from the street below and threading its way into even the smallest of rooms. Most nights pass without incident, shaped by coughs, whispered prayers, and the steady rise and fall of breathing. Yet there is always a quiet awareness beneath the surface. You feel it when the candle flame wavers too close to the curtain, or when the wind presses hard against the chimney. Fire! You become aware of the risk one evening as the mother carries a lit candle upstairs, shielding it carefully with her hand. The staircase is narrow, the wood worn smooth and dry. A single careless movement could mean disaster. In Victorian working-class homes, open flames were a daily necessity. Candles and oil lamps provided light. Coal fires warmed the hearth. A firmly established reality of 19th century urban life is that domestic fires were a common hazard, particularly in tightly packed neighbourhoods, where one blaze could leap quickly from roof to roof. You lie down and watch the candle placed in its holder on the small chest of drawers. Its flame flickers, throwing restless shadows against the wall. You cannot help but imagine what would happen if it tipped. There is a striking detail recorded in some urban fire brigade reports noting how straw-filled mattresses and wooden bedsteads could ignite rapidly once embers took hold. The very materials that offered warmth and rest also carried risk. The father double-checks the position of the candle before undressing. He places it farther from the curtain and ensuring the fabric hangs clear. Such small precautions form part of nightly routine. Historians have long discussed whether overcrowded housing significantly amplified fire danger, or whether the perception of risk loomed larger than statistical reality. As you watch the flame tremble, the potential feels tangible regardless of numbers. Outside, a shout erupts, suddenly followed by hurried footsteps. You sit upright, heart quickening. The cry repeats louder now. Fire in the next street. The father moves swiftly to the window, lifting the curtain just enough to peer out. A glow flickers faintly against the night sky, orange and unsettling. Voices rise in alarm. You feel how quickly sleep evaporates in the face of threat. The children stir, confused by the sudden tension. The mother gathers the baby close instinctively. A widely recognised feature of Victorian urban communities is the way neighbours responded collectively to emergencies. Buckets were passed hand to hand. Men rushed toward the source. Women stood ready to carry belongings to safety if needed. The father pulls on his boots and heads downstairs, drawn by both concern and solidarity. You follow to the window and glimpse figures running towards the distant glow. There is an intriguing anecdote from some 19th century memoirs describing how families kept small bundles of essential items prepared in case of sudden evacuation. Whether this household does so, you cannot be certain, but the mother's quick glance toward the chest of drawers suggests awareness. Minutes stretch. The glow brightens, then dims slightly as water is thrown. You hear the clatter of buckets and the shouted coordination of neighbours. Inside the bedroom, the candle flame feels more precarious than before. The mother extinguishes it quickly, plunging the room into deeper darkness to reduce any risk. Scholars continue to examine how frequent fire hazards shaped domestic vigilance in the 19th century. Did constant exposure to open flame foster a heightened sense of caution, or did familiarity breed complacency? As you stand in the dark listening to distant commotion, caution feels instinctive. Eventually the noise outside begins to subside. The glow fades to a faint shimmer, then disappears entirely. The father returns upstairs smelling faintly of smoke. He reports that the blaze was contained before spreading far. Relief settles slowly through the room. The baby, startled by earlier noise, fusses briefly before calming again. The children whisper questions about what happened. A mainstream observation from urban records shows that many cities expanded professional fire brigades over the course of the Victorian era, improving response times and reducing widespread devastation. Progress once again edges into daily life. The father lies down once more, though his breathing remains elevated for a few moments. The mother keeps her arm around the baby, eyes open longer than usual. You lie back and stare into darkness that now feels heavier, more aware of its fragility. The mattress beneath you, stuffed with straw, seems both comforting and combustible. Gradually, exhaustion reasserts itself. The room quiets. The immediate threat has passed. Outside, the street resumes its subdued hum. Inside, the family settles once more into the familiar arrangement of shared warmth. You close your eyes and recognize how sleep in Victorian Britain always rested upon thin margins. Open flame, narrow streets, dry wood. Yet alongside risk existed resilience and swift communal response. And as you drift into the remaining hours of night, you carry the faint scent of smoke in your memory, a reminder that even rest required vigilance in this world of candlelight and coal. After nights of noise and fever of celebration and alarm, there are also the quieter evenings when nothing particular happens at all. You climb the stairs, settle onto the mattress, and feel the familiar creak of iron beneath you. The air is neither especially cold nor stifling. The candle burns steadily. The room seems content simply to exist. It is on such nights that your mind drifts further than your body can travel. You lie beside the steady breathing of family and find yourself imagining other rooms, other beds. What would it feel like to have a space entirely your own? A door you could close without worrying about drafts or footsteps. A mattress thick enough to swallow the memory of factory bells. For many working-class Victorians, dreams of improvement were as much a part of nighttime as rest itself. Letters and diaries from the period reveal aspirations for better housing, steadier employment, and perhaps a small house with 2 bedrooms instead of 1. Sleep offered the only hours when such visions could unfold without interruption. A well-established feature of 19th century social mobility is that some families did gradually rise, moving from the most crowded districts into slightly more comfortable neighbourhoods. It was not common and it was rarely swift, but it occurred often enough to sustain hope. You turn onto your side and feel the mattress respond. It is not luxurious, but it is yours, paid for coin by coin. The iron frame glints faintly in lamplight before the candle is extinguished. There is a small but touching anecdote recorded in some autobiographies of individuals who grew up in cramped conditions and later achieved modest prosperity. They often describe the first night spent in a private bedroom as disorienting, almost too quiet. Solitude once desired required adjustment. You close your eyes and let your imagination wander. Perhaps one day the eldest daughter will marry and move into a house with an upstairs room solely for her children. Perhaps the youngest son will find work that pays enough to avoid taking in a lodger. Scholars continue to debate how realistic such aspirations were for the majority of working families during the Victorian era. Did the structure of industrial society allow for widespread advancement, or were most confined to incremental change? Lying here in the dark, the question feels suspended between optimism and restraint. The grandmother murmurs softly in her sleep, perhaps revisiting memories of her own youth. The baby shifts, then settles. The father's breathing remains deep and even. You think about how each generation in this bed carries a slightly different horizon. The grandmother remembers candlelit rooms even darker than this. The children may grow into a world of brighter streets and improved sanitation. A broadly acknowledged development of the late 19th century is the gradual expansion of compulsory education, offering more children sustained schooling. For some, literacy opened doors beyond manual labour. Dreams then were not entirely abstract. You imagine the eldest child someday reading by a better lamp, perhaps in a room with plaster unmarked by damp. You imagine a bed with springs that barely creak at all. The street outside is unusually calm tonight. No raised voices, no urgent shouts. Even the wind is mild. You feel how the absence of disturbance creates space for thought. In this stillness, the mind roams freely. There has been thoughtful reflection among historians about how dreams and aspirations functioned psychologically for working people. Were they sources of resilience, or could they deepen dissatisfaction with present conditions? As you hover between waking and sleep, you sense how hope coexists with acceptance. The mattress beneath you improved, though it still bears the faint memory of straw and uneven years. It reminds you where you are. Yet your thoughts stretch beyond the narrow walls. You picture streets with wider pavements, houses with separate rooms for parents and children, nights unbroken by factory bells. Gradually, imagination softens into dream. The room fades, replaced by landscapes shaped by longing. In this Victorian bedroom, sleep is not merely recovery from labour, it is also rehearsal for possible futures. And as you drift fully into slumber, you carry with you the quiet determination that one day perhaps the next generation will rest in a space slightly less crowded, slightly more their own. There comes a point as the century leans toward its close when you realise the night itself feels subtly altered, not dramatically, not in a way that would have startled the grandmother in her youth, but enough to notice. Gaslight has become steadier along the street. In some neighbourhoods, even early electric lamps begin to appear in wealthier districts, casting a different quality of glow against the sky. The factory bells still ring, but hours have shortened slightly in certain trades. Children attend school more regularly. Reform has not erased hardship yet it has nudged its edges. You climb the familiar stairs one more time and step into the bedroom. The iron bed frame stands where the old wooden one once creaked. The mattress is thicker than it used to be. The window fits better in its frame. A widely accepted historical shift of the late Victorian era is the gradual improvement in public health measures, housing standards and labour regulations. These changes did not arrive evenly or universally, but they altered the texture of daily life in incremental ways. The grandmother no longer climbs the stairs. Her cot downstairs has been empty for months now, a quiet absence folded into family memory. The children have grown taller. One has moved out, taking with her the memory of shared blankets and whispered courtship. You sit on the edge of the bed and feel how the room holds layers of time. The walls have witnessed straw mattresses, warming pans, illness, laughter, fire scares, and whispered prayers. There is a small but poignant detail in some late 19th century recollections where elderly individuals looked back on their childhood sleeping arrangements with a mixture of disbelief and fondness. They remembered the cold, the crowding, yet also the closeness. You lie down and notice that there is slightly more space now. Fewer bodies press against you. The baby is older, sleeping through the night more often than not. The mother, though still alert to every sound, allows herself deeper rest than in earlier years. Historians continue to examine how the concept of privacy evolved toward the end of the Victorian period. Separate bedrooms became more common among the middle classes and slowly filtered downward. Did this shift strengthen individuality at the cost of intimacy, or did it simply reflect improved standards of living? The answer rests somewhere between comfort and change. Outside, the street hum is softer than it once seemed. Perhaps your ears have grown accustomed. Perhaps the neighbourhood itself has shifted. You think back to the first night you arrived here when smoke pressed low over rooftops and the mattress beneath you felt unforgiving. You recall the itch of bedbugs, the warmth of shared breath in winter, the suffocating heat of summer. Now as you stretch out, the mattress supports you more evenly. The blanket is thicker. The window opens and closes without protest. A broadly recognised development of the era is the growing conversation about domestic comfort as a marker of respectability. Even working families began to see improved bedding and tidier rooms as symbols of stability. You close your eyes and listen to the steady breathing around you. The father's snores are softer. The mother's sleep is less frequently interrupted. Night in Victorian Britain has never been perfectly quiet or entirely secure. It has been negotiated, improvised, reshaped by policy and purchase alike. You sense how rest here is no longer solely an act of endurance. It contains small pockets of ease that earlier decades might not have known. The candle has long since been replaced by a steadier lamp downstairs, reducing the fear of accidental fire. The children no longer wake at every passing cart. The city continues to evolve. You allow your breathing to slow, matching the gentle rhythm of the room. The iron frame beneath you feels solid, reliable. As you settle deeper into the mattress, let the pace of this story soften. Imagine the street outside fading into a distant murmur. Picture the gas lamps dimming one by one. Feel the blanket resting lightly across your chest. The long arc of this Victorian night stretches behind you from straw-filled ticks to iron bedsteads, from factory bells to modest reform. Through it all, families have climbed narrow stairs and lain down together, seeking warmth and pause. Now the room grows quieter still. The air feels calm, the mattress cradles you gently. Let the images drift. The smoky rooftops, the whispered prayers, the Saturday bath steam curling toward the ceiling, the faint hum of industry softened by distance. You're safe here in this small room held by brick and memory. The night no longer presses so heavily. It simply surrounds. Allow your thoughts to slow. Allow the shared breathing to guide you. The story has carried you through crowded beds and cautious improvements, through cold winters and hopeful dreams. Now as the light fades entirely, there is nothing left to negotiate. Only rest. Sweet dreams.